Okay. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Red eyes. All right. We got a lot to talk about tonight. Because I don't make that many videos. I don't have time. So, I'll try to cram it all in one gigantic video. I guess it looks alright. Doesn't look too good. I'm gonna look like it's backwards or something. Okay, so Jade Pilled Jesus, we're gonna do I got some passages from The Way, the Living Bible. That's a pretty cool. It's like a kind of like, you know, the Jesus People Movement Bible, and it's illustrated with every now and then, every so often, you get a photograph in the Bible itself. So the idea is here to. Oh, by the way, later on tonight we'll be reviewing Hitler's second book. We will be reviewing a lot of New York Times gobbledygook, and I want to review this book. It's a really good book that one of the women from the house church gave me. This The Prisoner in the Third Cell by Jean Edwards. This is a really excellent book, so we're going to review that one. I'll review Hitler's second book. I got a lot of New York Times articles to criticize, and this interesting passage out of this here. Where is it? Over here. Yeah, this magazine. As Friends of Israel, you get this magazine. It's like basically a Christian Zionist magazine. There we go. Israel My Glory, it's called. That's right. It's associated with Friends of Israel. I think that's their magazine. And I want to talk about this really interesting interview I came across with Veronica Clark being interviewed by this Jewish YouTuber who goes by the name of Duvid. I'm pretty sure that was Duvid who was doing that video. And I want to talk about that. It was really interesting because this Duvid guy is an anti-Zionist Jew, but he's also a Freemasonist and an undercover Marxist. Basically, I mean that's the size and shape of it. Let me see here. Okay, I'm turning the background music down a little bit. Okay, so I'll start out. The idea was to show how Jesus was on to the control freaks of his day, who were trying to control what other people think, for one thing, about him specifically. So it's from John chapter 3, I think I actually have him. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifice, and money changers behind their counters. So Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them out. He drove out the sheep and the oxen, scattering the money changers' coins over the floor and turning over their tables. Then going over to the men selling doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Don't turn my Father's house into a marketplace." This, Living Translation takes a lot of liberty with paraphrasing, but I think it gets the job done okay. Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scripture concerning God's house will be my undoing. What right have you to order them out? The Jewish leaders demanded. If you have this authority from God, show us a miracle to prove it. All right, Jesus replied, this is the miracle I will do for you. Destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Okay, now, of course, he was talking about, he's going to die on the cross and be buried and raised again. All right. Now, this goes on with this guy Nicodemus comes. He was a Pharisee, so he came and talked to Jesus in secret because he was afraid, what the leaders of the Jews might do, because they had threatened to, kick people out of the synagogue. Reminds me of the ADL today, the Anti-Defamation League, how they have things rigged so that you can lose your job if they don't like, what you're saying. It's a freedom of selective speech. There's only certain speech you're allowed to you're actually free to use. There's certain speech that even if it's true, you're not allowed to say it. So Jesus said, what I am telling you so earnestly is this: unless one is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Man can only reproduce human life, but the Holy Spirit gives new life from heaven. So don't be surprised when I tell you must be born again. That's the born again passage. Now, I want to talk about. Okay, so Jesus was having this bicker with the Pharisees, and it says, because of the miracles he did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many people were convinced that he was the Messiah. But Jesus didn't trust them. He knew mankind to the core. No one needed to tell him how changeable human nature is. Okay, that's quite a paraphrase. I kind of like it. What else do I got here written down here? Then the Jewish leaders were all the more eager to kill him because, in addition to disobeying their Sabbath laws, he had spoken of God as his Father, thereby making himself equal with God. Well, I find this because so Jesus healed somebody on the Sabbath, and they considered that work. Well, if he wasn't God, see, that makes a big difference. But this is interesting. The reason they gave Jesus, because Jesus said, I'm doing these good works. Which of these good works are you going to stone me for? He said, not your good works, because you're making yourself equal to God. Well, I heard Dennis Prager, I mentioned this before, Dennis Prager on his radio show has Christian calling up talking about why he doesn't, I guess him in particular, or the Jews in particular, don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. Dennis Prager told him it was not because of his messianic claims. He's rejected because he made himself equal to God. See that? And that's interesting because it's the same thing that the Pharisees, and I just have to wonder, what if Dennis Prager were alive back then? Would he actually, he seems so meek and mild and well-mannered, would he actually pick up stones to stone Jesus? I don't know. You don't know. Yeah. So there's a discussion about Jesus among the crowd. Some say he's a wonderful man. Others said no, he's duping the public. But no one had the courage to speak out for him in public for fear of reprisals from the Jewish leaders. So, once again, we all know what that's like in today's world. You got to be careful of certain people who have control over our society in this way of influencing people to, lose their job, put pressure on them to, they got all the media, all the newspapers, all the movie making, television news, radio news. They got all that behind them to put pressure on people not to exercise freedom of speech. And I got to get into this. I got to get into this little blurb here, and this will help kind of put this whole Jade Pill Jesus thing into modern context. Okay, so this is an article from the Israel My Glory magazine, and every 83 seconds someone uploads an anti-Semitic post to social media. In 2016 alone, more than 382,000 anti-Semitic posts appeared on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, many of which were never removed, denying the Holocaust, portraying the Jewish people as genetically inferior. I never heard this thing, people portraying Jews as genetically inferior. I never heard of this. Denying the Holocaust, what does that mean? Does it mean questioning the official story? Why don't you have the free speech, the First Amendment, to do that? Okay. So also expressing hatred of them, calling for violence against them, and accusing them of such conspiracies as controlling Hollywood, elections, and world affairs. So wait a minute. You mean if you tell the truth, it's considered anti-Semitic? You mean if I say, because there's even Jews that admit to these things. There's Jews that admit to controlling Hollywood and the elections and world affairs. I mean, that's not new. That's not news. It's not a theory. It's not a conspiracy. It's just a fact. I mean, the Council on Foreign Relations selects our presidents. And it's funny because I saw Trump giving a speech last night. Where was it? Minnesota, I believe in. It's a great puppet show. That's all it is, a puppet show. Okay, so they got Trump. He's going to be in there for 8 years. They do this. They build the government 8 years from the right and then 8 years from the left. And they try to get people that the other side's really going to hate. That draws you in. See, that draws people into the game. That's why, because the last thing you want is people like me who are saying, let's split up America and secede and, go back to the drawing board. And they don't want that. They want you to stay in the game and think that you're going to use a president to get your way and force your way on everybody else. If you're a right winger, you're going to force all the left wingers in the country to have to submit to your will. And when somebody like Obama comes in, it's the other way around. And neither one of those things is right. What we should be doing is talking about how we're going to split this thing up. Let the left and right each have their own country. At the minimum, left and right. It could probably be in 100 different countries. So anyways, you see, so this is how it works today. You got somebody who's saying that the Jews control Hollywood and world affairs and so forth. It's anti-Semitic. So if telling the truth is anti-Semitic, what does that mean? What does it say about Semites if they oppose the truth? That's not a very good thing to say about Jews. I mean, actually, if you think about it, whoever wrote this article here is really making the Jews look bad, because they're trying to say that, look, they don't even want you to tell the truth, But these are the kinds of people that Jesus was dealing with in the Gospels, and I'll get back to that. I'll finish reading this article. It says, these figures do not even account for posts demonizing or delegitimizing Israel. More than 2.6 million anti-Semitic Twitter posts, including those aimed at Israel, were viewed and an estimated 10 billion times, August 2015, July 2016, according to study Anti-Defamation League. Well, this is the thing. I am not anti-Israel. I'm not an anti-Zionist. I'm a Christian Zionist. And here's how it breaks down now. You got two sets of Jews. You got the Jews who are Zionist and believe in a ethnic nation of Israel. And you got all these other Jews who say that they want to just stay in the lands of the Gentiles and do good. And, I have to question, what do you mean do good? I mean, 9/11? Is that's good? I don't know, how good is that? Larry Silverman and Michael Chertoff were, main players in that, in 9/11. It really didn't have anything to do with the Muslims. So how was that good? How is starting World War I good? I mean, if you know about Henry Ford, read Henry Ford's history of how we went over to Europe to try to prevent World War I, and he had an entourage, and amongst within his entourage were some Jews who told Henry Ford that the Jews were going to start this war and they were going to end it whenever they wanted to. And we're talking about the Jews that control everything. We're not talking about the everyday, Jew who, lives next door and, runs a department store or something. We're talking about the ones that control everything. Now the problem is, here's how this becomes a broad brush, is because the Jews who control everything are orchestrating this war on whites and this Marxist, cultural Marxism, trying to destroy the moral fabric of the country and defeat the Christian influence. And the majority of Jews support that agenda, and so it's hard not to get them broad brush like that, because if they're supporting that agenda, and if the agenda that's the enemy is the enemy of whites and Christians, then it's not an easy thing to overlook. I mean, but anyway, so she goes on and says, I think it's a she that wrote this article. Let me see who wrote this article. Yeah, it's a she, Jennifer Miles. So posts such as Hitler for President, 2020, Zig Heil, Heil Hitler. Okay, those are right. Hashtag Heil Hitler. Hashtag Kill Jews. Well, I'm not interested in killing Jews. And Heil Hitler, well, it depends on which Hitler you're talking about. The Hitler that kicked out the Marxist Bolsheviks out of Germany and Berlin and established his own banks and turned the country around and made it great. I'm all right with that. I'm all right with that Hitler, the Hitler that recklessly endangered the lives of the German people and actually had them set up for destruction like that. No, I'm not. I'm against that Hitler. What else? Okay, so let me see. Hashtag the Jewish people are responsible for every bad thing that ever happened in the world. I don't know about that. It's kind of an overstatement. Certainly, they do control the world governments, especially the first world. Is pretty much. I mean, it's just they control it. That's all there's to it. It's not like you got to be a rocket scientist to figure that one out. And just saying that should, just telling the truth should not be considered anti-Semitic. You're, just telling the truth. That's all. Let me see. Unfortunately, social media algorithms had created echo chambers for rampant, viciously anti-Semitic content that social network giants refuse to remove. Well, they're just not. They're just not ready. I mean, they've been removing it. They've been removing it, and eventually, YouTube will probably be as controlled as anything else, and it'll be a non-free speech zone. Metaphorical echo chamber is a place where one's ideas and opinions are reinforced or echoed by people sharing the same opinion, unchallenged by competing viewpoints. Okay, well, the thing is, they are challenged. If you live in this world, you're constantly challenged. If you're going to be challenging the world, it's because that's all you live in. You're immersed in challenge. So I don't, that just doesn't fly with me. This is a poorly written article. All right. Let me see if anything else is here worth reading here. Let me see. social media let anti-Semitic congregate with one another online, spew their anti-Semitic hatred. But the thing is, saying Jews own Hollywood and they control the government, it's not anti-Semitic hatred. You're just sort of stating the fact that, the sky is blue and, water is wet. And, let me see, I don't know if it's worth, okay, so here's the interesting, now Dennis Prager, speaking of Dennis Prager, is suing YouTube because they've taken down some of his stuff. That's pretty interesting. YouTube, owned by Google, is no stranger to any Israel bias and ideological discrimination. Though it boasts of being a platform for free speech, YouTube repeatedly censors pro-Israel conservative videos uploaded by Prager University, a political a conservative think tank. Now, probably the reason they don't like Prager is because he's not going along with the Marxist program in the war on whites. That's why they're going after him. It's not because they don't care if he's anti-Israel. I don't buy that either. Okay. So I thought that was kind of interesting, especially the fact that now telling the truth is considered anti-Semitic. All right, so back to the Bible. This is the Gospel of John. The temple police who had been sent to arrest him returned to the chief priests and Pharisees. "Why didn't you bring him in?" they demanded. "He says such wonderful things," they mumbled. "We've never heard anything like it." "So you also have been led astray," the Pharisees mocked. "Is there a single one of us Jewish rulers or Pharisees who believe he is the Messiah? These stupid crowds do, yes, but what do they know about it? A curse upon them anyways." Then Nicodemus spoke up. He was the guy that visited Jesus in secret. Is it legal to convict a man before he is even tried?" They replied, "Are you a wretched Galilean too? Search the scriptures and see for yourself. No prophets will come from Galilee." Then the meeting broke up and everybody went home. Well, the thing is, Jesus didn't come from Galilee, right? He came from Bethlehem. I mean, that's his place of origin. That was the prophecy was about the place of origin. It wasn't about where he's living at the time. So they kind of twisted the scriptures there. All right, let's see what else is going on here back in the days of Jesus with the ruling Jewish people. "Our father is Abraham," they declared. And this is Jesus arguing with the Pharisees. They say, our father is Abraham. "No," Jesus replied, "for if he were, you would follow his good example. But instead you are trying to kill me. And all because I told you the truth I heard from God. Abraham wouldn't do such a thing like that. No, you are obeying your real father when you act that way." They replied, "We are not born out of wedlock. Our true father is God himself." Jesus told them, "If that were so, then you would love me, for I have come to you from God. I am not here on my own, but he sent me. Why can't you understand what I am saying? Is it because you are prevented from doing so? For you are the children of your father, the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning and a hater of truth," that is, a liar. "There is not an iota of truth in him. When he lies, he's perfectly normal, for he is the father of lies. And so when I tell you the truth, you just naturally don't believe it." Okay. "Which of you can say truthfully, accuse me of a single sin? And since I'm telling you the truth, why don't you believe me? Anyone whose father is God listens gladly to the words of God. Since you don't, it proves you aren't his children." Okay. And so, see, Jesus is saying that those people who promote use lies, deception to rule, We know what, are actually the children of Satan. They're not children of Abraham. I mean, maybe, physically, that's possible, but that's not what Jesus is not referring to, the physical. He's interested in, where they are spiritually and who their spiritual father is. This is the thing, that World War I was built on lies, World War II was built on lies. And the lies resulted in millions of people being killed. And so you see, it's lying and murder. When the ordinary people of Jerusalem heard of his arrival, they flocked to see him and also to see Lazarus, the man who had come back to life again, as Jesus rose this guy Lazarus. Then the chief priests decided to kill Lazarus too, for it was because of him that many of the Jewish leaders had deserted and believed in Jesus as the Messiah. So you see how that works. If you don't do what we say, we'll rub you out. Now, at this point, it's usually they will cause you to lose your livelihood. And, what has to happen is people have to get tough and stop being pushed around by this ADL group. If you're an employer, and they try to, say you got somebody working for you who's anti-Semitic or something like that. As an employer, you got to stand up for the truth and say, well, you can't push me around. You're not going to push me around. It doesn't mean who I can hire or not, and you respect freedom of speech and so forth. I've told you these things so that you won't be staggered by all of these that lies ahead, for you will be excommunicated from synagogues, and indeed the time is coming when those who kill you will think they are doing God a service. This is because they have never known the Father or me. Yes, I'm telling you these things now so that when it happens you will remember I warned you. I didn't tell you earlier because I was going to be with you for a while longer. But now I'm going away to the one who sent me, and none of you seems interested in the purpose of my going. None wonders why. Instead, you are only filled with sorrow. But the fact of the matter is that it is best for you that I go away. For if I don't, the Comforter won't come. And if I do, he will. For I will send him to you. And when he has come, he will convince the world of its sin and of the availability of God's goodness and the deliverance from judgment. The world's sin is unbelief in me. There is righteousness available because I go to the Father and you shall see me no more. There is deliverance from judgment because the prince of this world has already been judged. That's, Satan. So that's rather enigmatic. I don't know how to really unpack that, so I'm not going to. I won't attempt that. Okay. Next is let's see here. I think. Okay. Okay, after Peter's denial, raise it. Then Ananias sent Jesus bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was standing in the fire. Aren't you one of his? Oh yeah, okay, so right. So they started asking Simon Peter, aren't you one of his disciples? Okay. But one of the household of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. Didn't I see you in the Olive Garden? So here's a case, where they're identifying somebody because he's identified with Jesus, and this is, they're coming after him. They're giving him a hard time. It's like the ADL of the old, of the first century. Yeah. All right. Okay. Then so they turn him over to they're not going to kill him themselves. They get the Romans to do the killing for him. That's an old trick, you know. Don't do it yourself. Get somebody else to do it. All right. All right. Okay, let's see. All right. Then Pilate laid open Jesus' back with a leaded whip, and the soldiers made a crown of thorns. I guess is where I'm reading, yeah. And placed it on him. And held King of the Jews, they mocked. Pilate went out and again said to the Jews, I'm going to bring him out to you now, because understand clearly that I find him not guilty. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said, behold the man. At the sight of him, the chief priests and the Jews officials began yelling, crucify, crucify. Pilate said, you crucify him. I find him not guilty. They replied, but our law says he ought to die, because he called himself the Son of God. Since I heard you were Dennis Prager for you. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the palace again and asked him, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. He says, why won't you talk to me? Pilate demanded, don't you realize that I have power to release or crucify you? Jesus said, you would have no power at all over me unless it were given to you from above. So those who brought me to you have the greater sin. That Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders told him, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. And that would be like me, when some of the stuff I say, if you say that, you're unpatriotic. And so that's like the ultimate. At these words, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again and sat down on the judgment bench on the stone-paved platform. It was now about noon, the day before Passover. Okay, and by the way, I'm going to clear up the whole, 3 days and 3 nights thing. Well, I'm at it here. Let me finish this. Okay, it was about noon, the day before Passover, and Pilate said to the Jews, here is your king. Away with him, they yelled, and away with him, crucify him. What, crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest shouted back. Then Pilate gave Jesus to them to be crucified. So they had him at last, and he was taken out of the city carrying his cross at a place known as the Skull, in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him and 2 others with him, one on either side with Jesus between them, and Pilate posted a sign over him reading, Jesus Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the signboard was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so that many people read it. Then the chief priest said to Pilate, change it from the King of the Jews to, he said, I'm the King of the Jews. Pilate replied, what I've written, exactly as what it says. Then the soldiers had crucified Jesus, put his garments into 4 piles, one for each of them. But they said, let's not tear up his robe, for it is seamless. Throw dice, and we'll cast dice, which fulfilled the scripture that said, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my robe. So is what they did. Standing near the cross were Jesus' mother, Mary, and his aunt, his wife, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother standing there besides his close friend, he said to him, here's your son. And to him he said, here's your mother. So he kind of, had John take care of his mom. Okay. The Jewish leaders did not want the victims hanging there until the next day, which was the Sabbath, a very special Sabbath at that, see. For it was Passover, so they asked Pilate to order the legs of them broken. But when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. They didn't break his legs because that was also fulfillment of the scripture, said his bones wouldn't be broken. They stabbed him in the side. Blood and water came out, and then Joseph of Arimathea came and got permission to put Jesus' body into his tomb. Okay. So, then there's this another account where so they had the tomb guarded because Jews says they better guard this tomb. They might they might come and steal the body and say he resurrected. But that was, it's kind of, it was like in Jesus' day. He had the ADL on his back the whole time. And then, of course, when the apostles started, they just went right over to the apostles and started on this. So, let's read, I guess before I get into this, we'll get into some New York Times stuff. Maybe I'll do the New York Times stuff first, and then I'll do this book. I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to do this here. Prisoner in the Third Cell. All right, so, all right, now, look at this picture. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, I'll fold it over and look at this picture. Okay. Tell me, what does that look like? Okay. What does that look like? Afghanistan? Maybe? Somewhere like that? Right? So, it's about Sweden, of course. How national has found a home in Sweden. So wait a minute. The Swedes aren't allowed to have a nation? What's with New York Times? They don't want the Swedes to have their own nation. Why? What's with all the hate? Why do they hate the Swedes so much? I don't get it. What is this war on whites that they're conducting? There's going to find page 1. Okay, here's the How National Found a Home in Sweden. A global machine feels the far right rise globally. So but these guys own the globe. What are they? Why are they so uptight? What's wrong with letting somebody else have their own nation? Why do they hate the Swedes so much? I don't get it. So this is what they want Sweden to have. That's what they want Sweden to look like, right? Like Afghanistan. Well, what's wrong with having Afghanistan? Letting those people live in Afghanistan, the Swedes live in Sweden. I thought that makes a lot of sense to me. It looks like I didn't bother to circle anything here because it's all, it's just obviously, what they're saying. They're saying that they're criticizing Trump about, he made this statement about bad things happening in Sweden, which actually it did. A right-wing echo chamber. As of 2018 elections approached, Swedish counterintelligence was on high alert. For foreign, oh yeah, okay. So they're saying that the Russians are behind it. The Russians are behind the Swedish right-wing media. I was kind of disappointed though. They didn't mention Red Ice Radio in the whole thing. What kind of article is this? Not very good. All right. We've had death threats, spam attacks, emails, total crazy. This is a girl from editor of a Swedish newspaper that criticized Russians. It says, it's probably, a newspaper that's owned by the same group that owns all the, American newspapers. Of course, they own all the newspapers in the West. And they're trying to say that, they're getting death threats. Yeah, it wasn't a very good article. It's just the usual, New York Times tripe, Trump and the Russians and, all this. But the last thing they want is anybody to have their own nation. And there's nothing wrong with it. This is completely, you won't find anything in the Bible that says you can't have an ethnic state. I mean, really, God's the one that started those ethnic states. So it's the children of Satan that don't like it's children of Satan that don't like the Swedes. Then this is interesting. So speaking of newspapers, that's right. Here we go. That's right. Let's do this one first. So, the ghost papers. Okay, the presses are coming to a standstill. The newspapers are going out of business. What's going to be really great is I'm going to have a giant barbecue celebration when New York Times finally goes under. I'll invite the entire world. Anybody that's on YouTube, Come to my house for barbecue when the New York Times goes out of business. We'll have a big party. Celebrating, it'd be like when David slew Goliath. How Wall Street / newsrooms wring out the cash of print. So there's big companies now. What's happening? I noticed they mentioned this about some of these little newspapers, and I'm gonna show you one. There's a little one that comes out locally where I live. It's mostly these infomercials, and but there's occasional article, and there's a Marxist article. Let's see what they say here. There's a place called Gatehouse Media. I'd like to look up and see who owns that. Gatehouse Media. I know the journal stars in the black. Mr. Lucano said, "How much in the black do you have to be? That's what drives us up a wall. Such is the strange state of an industry that has been part of America's fabric since the days of New England Current, a newspaper started by James Franklin, the older brother of Benjamin Franklin." When you talk about a New World Order creep, Benjamin Franklin predicted the New World Order. I mean, he wanted it. He promoted it. He says there's going to be a global government based on science. Here's the kind of science: climate change, man-made climate change. And you're supposed to be afraid of 335 parts per million of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, which are both not only harmless, but they're necessary for plant life. And they contribute such a tiny percentage of anything that might even be considered, greenhouse, because first of all, the Earth is not a greenhouse. It's open. It's open to outer space. It's close to absolute zero out there. That's why now the air. Well, yeah, of course the air traps heat, but the biggest trapper of so-called greenhouse gases are the clouds, the water vapor. So 335 parts per million. That's like 0.0, something like 0.00335, not 335, 30. Yes, 335, 0.0035 per 100. I mean, it's minuscule. It wouldn't matter if it doubled or tripled or quadrupled. It wouldn't, which you think could not happen, and and it's that's the science that's going to be ruling the world. And they got that stupid little girl, that stupid little Swedish girl who is totally exploited. What about exploiting children? I thought there was something wrong with exploiting children. I guess it's okay if you're exploiting it for some fake science. And the idea behind climate change, man-made climate change, is just to control the world more. It's more a way to control the world. And it just shows you that they really aren't interested in what non-meteor. I mean, they really are. They really are interested in what non-meteorologists have to say about the climate. That little girl, I don't think she's ever considered the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide content, and the nature of the molecule itself, and so forth. No, she's just somebody hired her to go to do this acting, and that's Benjamin Franklin for you. Healthy local democracy requires healthy local journalism. For decades, however, the tsunami-like forces of search and social platforms, political polarization, income inequality, and social and demographic disruptions have pummeled local news and enterprises while weakening community ties. Geography, which literally configures our democracy, and for so long explained local news profitability, now blocks local news organizations from scaling like Google, Facebook, and other behemoths that amass billions of users. No wonder advertising circulation revenue. Local journalists' jobs have dropped precipitously, fostering the alarming rise of news deserts, which in turn are local democracy deserts. Okay, so in other words, if they're not controlling, if the Marxists aren't controlling your news, then it must be a news desert. Because, last thing, it reminds me, okay, so I had this conversation with somebody. And, and I was telling him about how I'm celebrating, the loss of newspapers, this controlled information. So, you get much better information on the internet. So, can you really trust the internet? Well, see, what he's saying is he doesn't trust himself. He needs somebody else to tell him what to believe or not. I don't think he realizes he's saying he doesn't trust himself, but in effect, that's what he's saying. Because what they do, they try to they brainwash people to try to make you think, it's scary, you can't trust yourself. They don't say you can't trust yourself. They just say you can't trust these other people. But really, all you need is a brain and a little common sense. You go on the internet, you can figure out what's true or not. It's not like you can't do that. I don't know. 2015 leaders of the Knights Foundation chose to combat this narrative of decline and despair with their generous support, and later the Lenfest Institute. Okay, so these are people that are trying to, make sure the Marxist newspapers, the Marxists always have an outlet. Significant increase in digital subscription newspapers from Sacramento to Fort Collins. Milwaukee have reported double-digit growth rates in digital subscription. All right, so I wouldn't bother to subscribe to one of these Marxist. I mean, why would you do that? But the whole idea of the internet is you can get away from it. You don't need these. You don't need them. Why would you go and subscribe to one of these? And one of the things she says here is, they're bemoaning the fact, okay, you're not going to know the local hockey scores or whatever, and the local, high school football or whatever, and but there's articles in there too by AP, Associated Press. Well, you can live without those. Let's see what else is in there. This was really interesting. I really, one of the things that really made me happy here to see that the Village Voice, not only did they go out of business, even their internet site went out of business. That's great. I love it. Others imagine news moving from person to person, unedited and unchecked. Ooh. Wow. On Facebook, social media. A lot is going to be word of mouth. Ooh. Well, Todd Miller, 57, a former member of the county commission. And who knows what variant of BS gets passed around there. American News Desert Advanced. Okay, so no, you can't. You can't trust. You got to trust these Marxist control freaks to give you news. You can't trust yourself. And so yeah, Village Voice out of business. Not only look at all these papers that went out. This is great. I love this. Look at all these newspapers that went out of business. So there is good news. Not all the news is bad. There's some good news. So here's. So this is absurd. I took this out of one of the newspapers. So what they're doing to make newspapers now, they give them out for free, and they're chock full of advertisements and infomercials. But I thought this was kind of interesting. Opinion and editorial. Okay, so two of the things I found pretty interesting here is remembering September 11, 2001, A Mother Hopes for Unity. Okay, so that's that's going to be an interesting. Okay, so and this house is on fire, of course, about global warming, which they had to change to climate change because the global warming thing wasn't panning out. But the climate has, been changing ever since the beginning of time. So, you can't go wrong with saying, that's like saying it's going to get dark tonight. Change is the one constant in our lives, and every change, big and small, brings with it both opportunities and challenges. It is once again time to look at a change through the eyes of our children. Oh, okay, so the kids, or we're not going to, you're not going to think for yourself. You don't need that much of a background in chemistry and meteorology or anything. Instead, you're going to listen to kids. When Bob Dylan wrote "The Times Are Changing" in the 60s, he wasn't thinking of changes we're experiencing today. Well, actually, sort of he was. Certainly culturally he was thinking of that. And, Bob Dylan went over to the dark side in the long run. And these hippie movement and all that, was psychological operation by the intelligence services. Yeah, here she is, Greta Fungberg, a young girl from Sweden who speaks with honest clarity about climate crisis that threatens the future of our planet. Greta sailed from. Now it says she sailed from Europe to New York City to persist. Okay, do you think she took a sailboat? That's what he wants you to think, because you don't want to think she actually was on one of those big ships burning fossil fuels. But yeah, so here she goes. That's why he puts this where Greta sailed from Europe to New York City to participate in climate strike September 20th to 27th, demanding end to the age of fossil fuels. And how does she get here? On a ship powered by diesel fuel. That's great. Of course, he's not going to say that. He wanted you to think she sailed over here on a sailboat. Let's see. Please join me in support of a global climate strike. I can't do that. I'm not. I'm not a mentally retarded idiot. Okay, now what else is here? Okay, remember September 11th, Mother Hope for Unity. Okay, so I thought this was really interesting. So I looked up this this woman's name is Judy Reese. Okay, that happens to be a Jewish name, by the way, and the perpetrators of 9/11 happen to be Jewish. If you don't have to, be a rocket scientist, you look into it a little bit. And you'll find out, yeah, that's the case. Here, let me just state it simply. The buildings had to be prepared to come down in such a way that they were pulverized on the way down with, multiple explosions. And in order to do that, you had to have access to the buildings, and people looked into, well, we know who owned the buildings. They just bought the things a little while before this happened, took out insurance policies for terrorist event, and he bought the things knowing that they were a liability, that it was going to cost more to prepare the asbestos situation than he'd ever recuperate, unless something fortunate like the new Pearl Harbor that they were looking forward to took place. How convenient, and especially convenient. You missed work that day. You were there every other day, up on top there, having breakfast with your daughter. It has been 18 years since our country's heart shattered. Until that morning, we had never imagined that our country could be the target of such a massive attack. At least not since Pearl Harbor. Oh, Pearl Harbor, there we go, see. We went to school, work, airports, sporting events, and concerts without worry or fear. All that comfort left us in the morning hours of September 11th, 2001. Suddenly, we as a nation faced a tragedy unprecedented in our history. We watched as the horror played out on live television but we also witnessed the heroism. Without hesitation, first responders put their own safety on the line and rushed into the falling building, attempt to save as many lives as possible. EMTs didn't flinch at the thought of the danger they faced while caring for the injured. Many lost their lives trying to save another. In the aftermath of this tragedy, we witnessed America at its finest. People came together to comfort and aid the victims. Families, each community having lost one of its own or not, offered compassion and sympathy. My family received letters, cards, offers of help from caring people across every state in our nation. Teddy bears were sent to our children and lost parents or siblings, and companies donated gifts during the holiday season that followed to restore some feeling of normalcy. Quilts were stitched and given to comfort the broken. Every religious denomination offered prayers and consolation to all Americans. Not one bothered to ask your particular faith, but everyone had blessings for those of us who needed them. My community came together and supported our family along with other 17 Bucks County families who lost loved ones that September morning. The outpouring of kindness transformed me so much so that I've been working ever since to find as many little ways as possible to return the kindness through service to my community. We spent the past 18 years rebuilding, and though we can never return to the lives we had before that morning, moving forward, we can work to restore our country's strength. I've seen firsthand we can accomplish when we stand united. That is our story. But on this day, as Joshua's mother, I ask that we take this September to reflect this year. Let us call on officials and each other to spend this one day treating each other with dignity and respect. I hope that September 11th is a day of community, a day of coming together as a nation in unity and compassion. It is not a day of name-calling or finger-pointing, media reports on tweets or divisive speech. It is not the size of the crowds that matter or the number of people who visit Ground Zero, the Pentagon, Shanksville, our own garden of reflection, but the character of our nation as we solemnly remember remember those who we've lost and their families. So, I'm sorry that she lost her son, but I'm sorry also that she doesn't think it's important to find out who did it. And this other article here, this guy is saying we should all the adults should just listen to the children. Basically both of these things are kind of calls for becoming brain dead zombies. Stop thinking and just stop thinking and just I don't know. But that's this is the thing that I have a problem with the unity, because we really shouldn't be united. There's something else that let people unite in more specific ways than uniting because we don't have any particular convictions. That's no reason to unite. You drop your convictions, you become a brain dead zombie, and therefore you can unite. So this book, before I get into this book, I was saying when I was reading the Gospel of John, clarify the 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. So it says that he rose on the Sabbath, the day after the Sabbath, right? The first day of the week, which would be Sunday. He rose early Sunday morning. Okay. It speaks of the Sabbath and the day before the Sabbath and so forth. So you got the way it works. You got it's really not all that complex actually, but so you have Sunday. We're going to work our way backwards. You got Sunday morning, which is actually considered the beginning of the day. Sunday morning actually began. Sunday began what we consider Saturday night at 6. Okay. So, but for right now, we'll just call that. We'll call that Sunday night, because in the Jewish calendar, the night comes first and then the day, right? So that was Sunday night. Jesus rose from the dead, which was our Saturday morning, right? Well, that was our Sunday night. That's our Sunday, or our Sunday morning, or our Sunday morning is their Sunday night. That's all right. So you had Saturday day. You had Saturday night. Okay, so Saturday night comes first, and then Saturday day. Saturday night, Saturday day, Sunday night. And so there really wasn't a Sunday day. Okay, so then you had to have Friday day, which was preceded by Friday night. And then, before that, you had Thursday day and Thursday night. Okay. That's 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there wasn't, right, they didn't make it to Sunday night. Oh, wait, we had Sunday night. Whoops. That's right, we didn't have Thursday night. We had Thursday day, Friday night, Friday day, Saturday night, Saturday day, and Sunday night. So there's your 3 days and 3 nights. Now, Thursday was the day before a Passover that year, because if you read Leviticus, Exodus, so forth, Passover is considered a Sabbath. It's called a Sabbath. Saturday is not the only Sabbath. So that's how you resolve that problem. It's not a problem at all. Okay, so here we go. Prisoner in the Third Cell, Gene Edwards. Now, I really, really like this book, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not like the typical, Jesus loves the little children, and the flannel graph Jesus holding the lamb and with the bunny rabbits and the dough, and so riding a unicorn or whatever, jumping over a rainbow. So basically, what he does, he builds it's historical fiction. It's kind of filling in what it must have been like for John the Baptist, who, he dedicated his life to announcing the coming of the Messiah, and he was preparing people, and he lived a very almost like the life of a homeless. He gave everything up, and he was single-mindedly dedicated to this cause of making way for the Messiah, so the Messiah would bring in the kingdom of God. And so, a large expectation on the part of the apostles and the Jewish people at the time. The expectation was that he would overthrow the Romans and establish this, Davidic kingdom that was militaristic, and but also with the miracles, the healing, and all the other stuff that that come with the kingdom of God. You have no more sickness and no more death and all these sorts of things. Now, I guess people imagine it to different degrees of exactly how far that was going to go. I mean, would there actually be no death in that? So, anyways, what happens is, the story where John the Baptist is condemning. He's pointing out the sins of certain people that took offense. It's kind of like my YouTube videos. There's certain people that take offense to that, and they would probably like to see me destroyed. But that's what happened to John. Now they caught up to him and put him in prison. And this is Jesus reflecting. This is this author putting words in Jesus' mouth. But he's imagining this is how it would go, because here's what John the Baptist. What had happened was he's in jail, in prison, and he was so disturbed by he was disturbed by the fact that it really didn't seem like the kingdom of God was coming, because here he is, he's in jail. That doesn't sound like what they were expecting. It doesn't really sound like what we were expecting. And I guess I find that so fascinating, is because one of the interesting things about this house church movement that I belong to is trying to allow God to define His agenda, and it's often what we don't expect, and it's often. This is why it's very, difficult. It takes faith, not because there's no evidence. It takes faith because it's challenging. It's challenging when you're expected to go along with something that doesn't jibe with your natural expectations. So John sends some messengers to Jesus to find out what's going on. He says, he's like, "Are you really the Messiah, or are we waiting for somebody else?" And so now this is right before Jesus is thinking to himself. Jesus told the messengers, go back to John and tell John, what do you see? The blind are healed, and the lame are walking. There's even people coming back from life, and and then he also says, and blessed is he who does not take offense in me. And still from John's point of view, it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, I'm good thing, good for those people that are being healed, but what about me, sort of thing. It still doesn't add up, And this author, he points out that not everybody was healed, not everybody, there's even, he's suggesting there's even people waiting in line, and it gets late and it's time to go, it's time to leave. Some people just had to, and this happens today. Not everybody's healed. Not everybody's, there's that movie about this kid that was drowned in the ice and came back to life, and that's rare. That doesn't happen to everybody who's a Christian that prays for somebody to to come back to life, or even to be healed, and not to die in the first place. That's extremely rare, and so even in Jesus' day, there was a lot of people that didn't get healed. But at any rate, so I'll read this part here. It's kind of an interesting. Jesus is thinking about John, and Jesus is saying, "John, they have come for you, much sooner than you had thought. In a few minutes you will be no more. There's no time to send word to your disciples, nor to my mother, Mary, who was worried so much for your safety. You will not be given opportunity of even a single word to anyone. nor will you be able to ask again the question you addressed to me. In less than 4 minutes now, you will be dead. How many thoughts can be crowded into one's mind in 4 minutes? How many doubts? How many questions? Not many, but John, worst of all, there will be no answers. And blessed are you, John, if you are not offended with me. They have unshackled you. The staircase is before you. The door is open. You can see the light of day above you. Why is this happening to you, John? You of all people. Your head severed from your body. Why? Because of an obscene dance of a teenage girl? How ironic. She's the one, her mom requested that he be beheaded. But anyway. You'll never live to see your 33rd birthday, nor will you know exactly why I have called you. Nor will you know if your life on this earth counted for anything. Those long years in the searing desert, you deny yourself of everything this earth affords except food and water, and only enough of that to keep you alive. You did this all for me. Yet as you face death, there is no evidence that your life was anything but wasted. Have I forsaken you in the hour you need me the most? And blessed are you if you're not offended with me. You have reached the head of the stairs. You are not sure which way they would have you turn. A guard points to the left. You follow. Is this happening? You have less than 1 minute before that immutable blank. You recall those long vigils before my face. Did you misunderstand me? Were you mistaken? Perhaps you did not hear my voice at all. In all those years you lived alone in the desert, you never once knew love or comfort from any other human being. Will I not extend such comfort to you now, at last? You never had the pleasure of your own children to climb up on your lap, to give you earthly joy. You never came in contact with a woman. You never had a wife. You have never known intimate love. You have never even had a friend. Your whole life was lived for your calling and for me. Will I not now, in this last moment of your life, part the veil and allow you to see something, anything of my purpose in your life and in your death? Will you die wondering why I ate and drank as I did, why I did not fast as you fasted, nor pray as you prayed? Was the Messiah not to be a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief? You will die today at the hands of unclean, uncircumcised heathen, Gentile Romans. But your death at their hands will come about only by my sovereign permission. And you will die not understanding why I allowed this seemingly senseless act. And blessed are you if you are not offended with me. You will not see the multitudes cry out in jubilation at my entry into Jerusalem. Neither will you see me crucified, nor hear of my resurrection and my triumph over death. You will die not knowing that you have proclaimed the coming of no less than the Son of God. Death is but a few seconds away, and still there is no answer to your question. You will die not understanding, and blessed are you, John, if you're not offended with me. They've opened the gate to the courtyard. There it is, the block on which you will lay your head. And there, the man who will take your life. You will be remembered as one of the greatest men who ever lived. But you will not know that, nor will you hear the Son of God say, O men born of woman, of men born of woman, there was none greater than John. Even now, as you kneel, you wonder if you are a complete failure. You gave so much, poured out your life so completely, lived for God so singly. Yet despite all this, you could not so much as win the favor of God to the point of his giving you one answer to one question. It was, after all, the only request you ever made. I did not give to you an answer. I never have. The question of why always remains unanswered in all my dealings with men. This is my way. But if there were one human being on this earth to whom I would make clear my purpose, it would be you. And it would be now. Above all other men and women who have ever lived, I would give you an answer. John now placed his head upon the block. When I called you John, I told you that you would announce the coming of the Messiah. You assumed that because you were going to prepare the way for me, you would have the joy of seeing that wonderful day of my coming in glory. But today you have met a God you do not understand. Such is the mystery of my sovereignty. Such are my ways in every generation. No man has ever understood me, nor not fully. No man ever will. I will always be something other than what men expect me to be. I will work out my will in ways different from what men foresee. The guard shifted his weight. The blade is raised above you. Death stands beside you. Died, my brother John, in the presence of God, who did not live up to your expectations. And blessed are you if you are not offended with me. So, wow, I thought that was pretty powerful. Shall we scorn that God has revealed so little concerning his ways, or rejoice that he has revealed so much? It kind of reminds me of me with my YouTube channel. And 147 subscribers, and I'm hyper shadow banned. So I never know if anybody sees my video other than the NSA and the FBI and the CIA. All right, let's see here. There's some questions in the back of the book I thought were pretty interesting. Like questions you could ask your discussion questions. Let's look at the discussion questions. Here we go. Okay. All right. Let's see. Look at page 1719, which describe John's absolute devotion to God, unimpeded by cares of this world. What would you require? What thorns would you need to pull from your life to live unhindered before God? Question number 1. Okay, so question number 2. Remember John for many things, not least Jesus praised in Matthew. Of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. But in this story, John never felt his ministry was great. What's your opinion of your own legacy? How do you expect people will remember you? How do you generally react to nonconformist people who don't fit in by nature or by choice? How does your immediate community respond to them? How welcome are they in your church? How can we recognize a person of God? What are the hallmarks to look for? And how can we avoid looking at the wrong factors? These are all very interesting questions. I should bring this to my house church group. I really like this book. I told the girl that gave this to me, it was like outstanding, because it gets you to think about foundational things, fundamental aspects of reality itself. How is God doing things? Why is he doing it this way, and so forth? And you can get into all that predestination of free will, and why are some people saved and others aren't? That kind of stuff. It really is really challenging. It's a good book. John railed against the Pharisees who had burdened the people with man-made religious rules. Are there any religious or social systems today that might prevent people from connecting with God? What can you do to change or oppose these systems? Well, I have a YouTube channel. I'm opposing. That's what my YouTube channel is called. Love and Division. John answered God's calling, though he had questions, and never looked back. What is God calling you to do? How can you be wholehearted? Has God ever failed to meet your expectations? How did you respond to him? What happened in your relationship with him as a result? Why did Hanel and Parnach land in the first and second cells? Okay, so these are two guys that were on either side of him. And they were both complaining about God for different reasons. That's okay. When John's disciple brought his question to Jesus, what caused Jesus to such anguish? Do you think Jesus ever had a similar response to your own doubts or anxious fears? How do you respond to God we do not understand? who is capable of healing many but does not heal all. Have you ever been offended with God? If so, what are the standards to which you were holding God? Why do you think he remains so difficult to understand? It's really interesting because, it's a really basic, it's one of those questions, a stumbling block for a lot of people. When I was doing my street witnessing, a lot of people, and not just that, even witnessing in other contexts, a lot of people you see this question about, what seems unfair to them, and that prevents them from ever moving forward. Because the question's not answered, and so they're, in a sense, that question is going to end up condemning them. Think of a time when you've prayed or pleaded and the only answer had been silence. How does this affect your relationship with God? How do you think God was saying? What do you think God was saying by remaining silent? I must be something other than what men expect me to be. I will work out my will in ways different from what men foresee. Do you agree with the author's proposition? What can we know of God? What sort of assumptions about him should we avoid? Yeah, that's interesting because it's not like you can't know anything about God. There's an awful lot you can know about God. That's why that's why he gave us the prophets and the scriptures and so forth. It's the unanswerable things that are very difficult. But, okay. Do you trust your understanding of God, or do you trust God himself? When it's easy to confuse the two. When is it easy to confuse? So, that's interesting because the way this presents God, I find very convincing in the, because, life itself is one of those conundrums. The origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, and so forth. Those fit right in there with this unknown, the unknowable. These guys that think that there's a big bang. So you have this pre-existing condition called a wave function that can produce universes. Well, where do you get that from? We have a pre-existing condition, believers. It's called God. It makes more sense because of the intelligibility of the creation. Now, Hitler's second book. Okay, this is really interesting now. According to David Irving, this book is more, he considers more reliable than Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf. So, I was talking earlier about Veronica Clark, the Nazi historian, I call her, Nazi historian. She's being interviewed by this Jewish guy, Doovid, it's D-O-O-V-I-D, something. And anyway, he's agreeing with her on a lot of points about Hitler in terms of Hitler being a Zionist, because Hitler was actually a Zionist. He worked to get Israel a homeland. The idea was if you're going to expel the Jewish people, they should have somewhere to go. See? And this Jewish guy on YouTube here he was agreeing with her because because it's probably true. For one thing, he's saying that he was agreeing also that the Jews were behind financing and getting Hitler to do all this helping him do all this Zionist establishment of Israel, and that when the Nazis were confiscating Jewish property and businesses, they weren't keeping the money, they were forwarding it to Israel. And this is according to Veronica Clark and the Jewish guy. He also agreed with her. Now, of course, I think his agenda, the Jewish guy, Duved, his agenda is to, I believe, try to smear the Zionist movement with Hitler, because he's an anti-Zionist Jew, and he's one of these that he says, that the idea of a Jewish land of Israel is heretical. That the actual his belief is that the Jews permeate the world and help usher in the New World Order. But for him, the New World Order is a good thing. It's this peaceful brotherhood of all men, and blah blah blah. And it's that's not reality. Reality is cultural Marxism. All kinds of anti-family immorality, all kinds of decadence to just get rid of the family, so the government has no as really government is God, and the handful of people on top are the gods, and there's just there's not that many on top of the pyramid, and somebody like Trump is so far down, he's so far down the totem pole, or down the pyramid, that he really doesn't count. You don't, people just wrapped up in this puppet show, and cause you don't hear, for instance, you don't hear Trump saying we need to get rid of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Federal Reserve and Henry Kissinger. He doesn't say this, and if he did, he'd end up like John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was the last president who thought that presidents weren't puppets, and he was mistaken, unfortunately. Okay, so what I'm going to do with Hitler here is read passages that I found was interesting. What I'm going to try to do is concentrate mostly on passages that have to do with Jews. And there's not that many, really. The bulk of his writings here. This was him back in 1928, 1930, 32, 33. Okay. It's mostly foreign policy, but he's mostly railing against German bourgeoisie, which is our equivalent of normies. He hated the normies, and the normies for some reason wanted to attack Italy, and he's saying, "Get lost. Italy's not a problem." And so most of this he's just complaining about the normies of his day. It would be like the people in our day who are kind of hung up on Republican versus Democrat and so forth, and don't realize that they should split up. We should have at least two different countries here. Okay, so let's see what he says here. Let's see. This will take a while, but I'm saying I don't make videos that much anymore, and I gotta put them all in one. How could you keep going? All right. Okay, page 14. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wars which are fought for aims that, because of their whole nature, do not guarantee a compensation for the blood that has been shed, are sacrilegious, committed against the nation, a sin against the people's future. Okay. Which, by the way, he wasn't able to practice what he preached because he really was very reckless. If he was a Christian, now Jesus said, who what king is going to go to battle without first, understanding if they're going to have a chance of winning, and he should have known that he did not have. You have to win the rhetorical war first, and he didn't. He hadn't won it with the American government, and he hadn't won it with the British government. Of course, the American government and the British government, by that point, were both owned by Jewish controllers. So he should have known that. But at any rate, okay, let's see. Okay. Once the last remains of this Nordic blood are eliminated, okay, the culture of European peoples rests on the foundation which its infusion of Nordic blood has created in this course of centuries. Once the last remains of this Nordic blood are eliminated, the face of European culture will be changed, the value of the states decreasing, however, in accordance with the seeking value of the people. And can you say, can you say the Muslim invasion that's happening now, the war on Europe, promoted and orchestrated by the certain, same control freaks who run the world, who are, in charge of Americans' military policy. They say, okay, go over there and attack the Middle East, and we'll tell the Europeans they got to take the Middle Easterns because we've been telling them for decades they have too many people, and now we're going to tell them they need more people. And they stop having babies, overpopulation, blah, blah, blah. Now you need these people to come in there, and you can see what's happening. Exactly as he said here. That's exactly what took place eventually. It took a while. Okay. The aim is the preservation of life and not heroic death or even cowardly resignation. Well, he missed the aim. That's all there is to it. What's this now? 12 at 2, 3. Let me see what that is. I missed that one. Okay. In a peace policy that fails leads just as directly to the destruction of a people, that is, to the extinction of its substance of flesh and blood, as a war policy that miscarries. In the one case, just as in the other, the plundering of the prerequisites of life is the cause of the dying out of a people. For nations have not become extinct on battlefields. Lost battles rather have deprived them of the means for the preservation of life, or better expressed, have led to such a deprivation, or were not able to prevent it. And indeed, the losses which arise directly from war are in no way proportionate to the losses deriving from a people's bad and unhealthy life as such. This is the silent hunger and evil vices in 10 years kills more people than war could finish off in 1,000. Look at the cultural Marxism that's taking place now. He's exactly right. That's exactly what it's meant to do. It's a way of destroying people. Okay, let's see here. For so little as mankind, which is made up of different race values, possesses a uniform average value, just as little is the personality value within a people the same among all members. Every deed of a people, in whatever field it might be, is a result of the creative activity of a personality. No distress can be redressed solely by the wishes of those affected by it, as long as this general wish does not find a solution in a man chosen from a people for this task. Majorities have never wrought creative achievements. Never have they given discoveries to mankind. The individual person has always been the originator of human progress. Indeed, a people of a definite inner race value, so far as this value is generally visible in its culture or other achievements, must at the outset possess the personality values, for without their emergence and creative activity, the cultural image of that people would never have come into being, and therefore the possibility of any inference as to the inner value of such a people would be lacking. All right. When I mention the inner value of people, I praise it out of the sum of achievements lying before my eyes, and thereby, at the same time, I confirm the existence of specific personality values which acted as representatives of the race value of a people and created the cultural image. Okay, 41. Okay. Let's see here. Such is exactly the case in the lives of nations. It is often terrible to see how little men want to learn from history, how with such imbecilic indifference they gloss over their experiences, how thoughtlessly they sin without considering that it is precisely their sins, through their sins, that so and so many nations and states have perished, indeed vanished from the earth. Okay. Okay. Hence it has become the fighter for freedom and bread in the highest sense of the word. Freedom and bread is the simplest and yet, in reality, the greatest foreign policy slogan that can exist for any people. The freedom of being able to order and regulate the life of a people according to its own interest, and the bread that this nation requires for its existence. Okay. Moving right along. Centrist circles, under all circumstances, desired a policy aimed at preserving the so-called Catholic Habsburg state, in connection with which they talked mendaciously about clan brothers, whereas they knew very well that in the Habsburg monarchy these clan brothers were slowly but surely being driven to the wall and robbed of their membership in the clan. But for the center, German viewpoints were not a standard, indeed not even the German proper. The gentlemen were founder of any Pole, any Alsatian trader, any Francophile, that they were of the German who did not want to join such a criminal organization. Under the pretext of representing Catholic interests, this party, even in peacetime, had lent a helping hand to harm and ruin the major bulwark of a real Christian worldview, Germany, in all possible ways. And this most mendacious party did not even shrink from going arm in arm in the closest friendship with the vowed deniers of God, atheists, blasphemers of religion, as long as they believed they could thereby harm the German national state and the German people. Thus, in the establishment of the insane German foreign policy, the center, the Christian Catholic pious center, had Jewish God-denying Marxists as loving allies at its side. Whoa! Oh my God. For just as the center did everything it could to protect itself against any anti-Habsburg policy, the Social Democrat, as then representative of the Marxist worldview, did exactly the same, albeit for other reasons. To be sure, the ultimate intention in both parties was the same, to harm Germany as much as possible. The weaker the state, the more unlimited becomes domination of these parties, and therefore the greater advantage to their leaders. Of the Old Reich wanted to resume the unification of German element in Europe on the basis of national political viewpoints, then the dissolution of the Habsburg conglomeration of states necessarily linked to it entailed a new grouping of European powers. But I thought that was the interesting line. That was the greatest. So you got this center, the centrist, and they don't even know that they're working right along with the Marxists, just like today's centrists. Okay, let's see, 68.5. Okay. When I once more examined the sins of this house and the history of the German people, to me it seems distressing that this time the mills of God were propelled by forces which lay outside the German people. I just find this interesting, that we're supposed to think that Hitler was some kind of raging lunatic that woke up one day and decided he was going to kill all the Jews, That's so funny. And, this is the kind of thing that we were actually taught. I think that, it's going to be, you're not allowed to deny it. It's like, 1, 3, 4, okay, 4. Okay. Okay. Here, the Germans are really only the cultural fertilizers for other peoples. Indeed, in reality, the greatness of these nations is, in general, often to be ascribed to the high percentage of German contributions and accomplishments. Once we keep the size of this constant loss of people in view, we will immediately be able to estimate the slight importance of the border policies sponsored by the bourgeois world. Okay, so I think he's talking about the normies back then, who like our normies now. All right, let's see, page 110. We're moving right along. We're already at page 110, and it's only like 240 pages, so we'll be done this pretty quick. Okay. Now remember, I'm trying to read the passages that are most alarming. That are most, these are the passages that are kind of most revealing of Hitler, who he was, and so forth. I'm just jumping over all kind of mundane things like the little bickering he had with the normies who wanted to attack Italy. It's not really all that consequential. Today, however, these incredible economic dreamers imagine that England, after having risked the existence of her world empire in the monstrous 4.5-year World War, will now view German competition differently because she was the victor, as if the whole question were some sporting matter. No, for decades before the war, England had tried to break the threatening German economic competition, the growing German maritime trade, etc., with economic countermeasures. Only when they were forced to understand that this would not succeed, and when, on the contrary, Germany, by building her navy, showed that she was actually determined to carry out her economic warfare to the extent of the peaceful conquest of the world, did England, as a last resort, invoke violence. This is really really interesting, isn't it? Because and Hitler really, so Hitler's saying, look, there's nothing wrong with the Germans standing up, and being strong. He's not out to destroy England. It doesn't say anything about destroying them or anything. It's just saying that, that we could be strong. We don't have to, And by the way, who was in charge of England? It wasn't the English. Okay. All right, so let's see here now. Page 118. Likewise, that the Jews especially welcomes such a conception, for logically pursued it leads to racial chaos and confusion, to a bastardization, negrification of culture mankind, and thereby ultimately to such a lowering of its racial value that the Hebrew, who has kept free of this, can slowly rise to world domination. At least he fancies that ultimately he will be able to develop into the brain of this mankind which has become worthless. So this is really interesting. This is happening today. This is exactly what's happening today. Aside from this fundamental and basic error of the pan-European movement, even the idea of a unification of European states, forced by general insight emerging from a threatened distress, is a fantastic, historically impossible childishness. Therefore, I do not mean to say that such a unification under Jewish protectorate and Jewish impulsion as such would not be possible from the outset, but only that the result could not match the hopes for which the whole monkey business sets the stage. So he accurately predicted exactly what happened with Europe and what's going on, and what they're doing now with this trying to third worldize. They're trying to third worldize. They're trying. There's a reason. There's a reason that there's this war on whites and a war. And it's a war on Christians also, but not. See, Christians aren't quite as threatening because. See, the idea of brotherhood of all man is not a Christian idea. A Christian idea is that you could have a brotherhood of children of God who are of all different races. But that's different than a nation. But this idea, this Christian idea that all different nations and all different nationalities and so forth can be members of the kingdom of God, is exploited by the Marxist control freaks into saying that you therefore have to have your you have to suffer this weakness of this multicultural nonsense, and what happens is it's also this multi-religious thing. You really shouldn't have a multi-religious nation. To me, that's an abomination, and that's really a weakness. And weakness is what these New World Order control freaks are seeking for everybody else. Okay, so they want you to be weak, okay, and Adolf Hitler got that dead on, and we're seeing it right now. Okay. Jewish. Okay, wait. What is Jewish? Let no one believe that such a European coalition could mobilize any strength that would manifest itself externally. It is an old experience that a lasting unification of nations can take place only if it is a question of nations which are racially equivalent and related as such, and if secondly their unification takes place in the form of a slow process of struggle for hegemony. Now, I don't necessarily agree that it's just. You can use race as a unifier, but I think that really, for me, the real unifier should be faith, belief. Specifically for me, belief in Jesus. And it's not something I expect to enforce, but I would like to see like Christian secession, for instance. So that Christians could have a strong nation in which they could arrest the movement of the New World Order, and actually a strong nation can help other people better than a weak nation. So I'm not interested in becoming weak. All right, so not in the sense that I don't mind becoming weak in the sense that spiritually, because we need Jesus as our strength. But weak in the sense of common sense, practical daily living. Like you got to get up and you got to have the strength to turn the key in the ignition. Otherwise you're not going to get to work and make money. And you need the money, so you got to survive, and you can help other people survive. Okay, where was we? We're 121, 7, okay. For since the emigration process in Europe was a selection of the fittest, this fittest in all European peoples lying primarily in the Nordic admixture, the American Union, in fact, has drawn to itself the scattered Nordic elements from among people who are very different as such. Yeah, see, I think he had a... See, this America kind of disproves... America kind of disproves the idea that, race itself is enough to make a strong nation. I mean, look where we are now, Okay. And I think that Hitler had sort of too much of an idealistic view of America as being successful, and he doesn't. Look what happened in World War II. If the American majority population was German, and we went over there and killed all the Germans, and Eisenhower oversaw this starvation of 1 million surrendered soldiers. They had already surrendered and everything. They starved in many ways. The American government was already under the control of the same, the Bolshevik people that what Henry Ford called the international Jew, the intellectuals who started, the movement in Russia that murdered 60 million people. They already had the control over the American government by then, and definitely England they've been in control of for centuries. And Hitler didn't, he didn't know this. I don't know why. So that, I have one. There's one Hitler conspiracy that I can't totally rule out, and that's the idea that he was in on this somehow, because the purpose of World War II was to destroy nations. And so you get this guy to set up this, super nation, the uber nation, and then destroy it to such a point, such a humiliation, such a loss, that people, they were able to use that as a springboard for anti-nationality. And then what would happen, then Hitler escaped and went to Argentina. I don't know. But that's the one thing that kind of one thing I really can't totally dismiss. I don't actually believe it, but it's the hardest. I can't just dismiss it either. Let's put it that way. So, let's see, 150, 79. Okay, we're up to 150. Okay, the belief in a German-Russian understanding is in itself fantastic as long as a regimen rules in Russia, which is permeated by only one aim, to carry over the Bolshevik poisoning to Germany. See, so now that he knew, okay, it is natural, therefore, for communist elements to agitate for a German-Russian alliance and thereby hope rightfully to be able to lead Germany herself to Bolshevism. It is incomprehensible, however, if national Germans believe that it is possible to achieve an understanding with the state whose greatest interest is the destruction of this very national Germany. And he's absolutely 100% right. And General Patton was right, too. We fought on the wrong side of the war. We should have been with the Germans to defeat the Russian Bolsheviks. But the reason we didn't do that, of course, is because we're owned by the same people that owned the Bolsheviks. So, and that was way back then. We were already owned. They already owned this country by then. And so they killed Patton. And they, he's insane. And last thing we want is another war. Like that's what they do. They start wars. They decide when to end them. They just didn't want that war because that was a war against them. Because they were, in fact, Bolsheviks. The people that owned the United States government, the shadow government, by then was already Bolshevik. And that's why they could get somebody like, I think Eisenhower was in charge at the time, when to just starve 1 million surrendered soldiers, make them stand there until they died, out in the open like that, under barbed wire. All right, let's see here. 151. Obviously, should such an alliance finally come into being today, its result would be complete rule of Jewry in Germany, exactly as in Russia. Likewise, incomprehensible is the opinion that one can wage a war against the capitalist West European world with this Russia, for in the first place, present-day Russia is anything but an anti-capitalist state. It is, to be sure, a country that has destroyed its own national economy, but nevertheless only in order to give international finance capital the possibility of absolute control. He knew exactly what was going on in the world. This is for sure. I mean, as far as the Russian question, he had it down 100%. He knew exactly, and this is exactly what happened now. This is why I tell people, why are they trying to scare us with Russia? I mean, Russia's less communist than we are. We're the Bolshevik leaders now, let me see. Okay. If this were not so, how could it be, secondly, that the very capitalist world in Germany takes a position in favor of such an alliance? It is, after all, the Jewish press organs of the most outspoken stock exchange interests who espouse the cause of a German-Russian alliance in Germany. See? This is exactly what they're doing. This is exactly what they're doing today. They never let up. As far as I'm concerned, World War II is still going on, and the Russians are still and not the Russian people, but the Russian leadership, who wasn't Russian at all, are still winning. Okay. All right. 152. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just imagine Germany allied with a real anti-capitalist Russia, and then picture how this democratic world Jewish press would mobilize all the instincts of the other nations against Germany. Okay, so how, especially in France, complete harmony would immediately be established between French national chauvinism and the Jewish stock exchange president. For let one not confuse such a process with the struggle of White Russian generals against the Bolshevism in early times. Okay, the White Russian fought against the Jewish stock exchange revolution. In truth, international capitalists read revolution in the highest sense. Today, however, anti-capitalist Bolshevism become national would stand in a struggle against world Jewry. Today, however, anti-capitalist Bolshevism become national would stand in a struggle. I don't understand that. What he's trying to say there. But at any rate, this is I'm reading now. This is. People who want to try to think that Hitler just had absolutely no reason for wanting to oppose the Jews who were ruling everything. I mean, they just had 60 million people murdered in Russia. Why are you going to not say anything or do anything? Okay, let's see, 153. Above all, there could be no better chance for the French government to master its own inner difficulties than to undertake a fully danger-free struggle against Germany. In such a case, I'm not sure where this is going. Let me see. Oh, I think I was just reading the end. Let me see. Whoever understands the importance of press propaganda and its infinite possibilities for inciting nations and besotting people can imagine to what orgies of hate and passion the European Western nations would be whipped up against Germany, for then Germany would no longer be allied with Russia of a great, noteworthy, ethical, bold idea, but with the despoilers of the culture of mankind. Which is, exactly what happened. And that's exactly how, and exactly they're doing it, they're trying to do the same thing. That's why I'm so happy to see the newspapers go out of business. And like I said, when New York Times go out of business, everybody on YouTube, everybody on the internet is invited to my house for a barbecue. Everybody on the entire internet. All right, let's see here. Okay. Ooh, okay, we're jumping up to 180. Let's see here. 180. Okay. Okay. Okay, he was speaking about the Dawes Plan was an attempt by the Allied victors in the First World War to collect war reparations. Debt from Germany set at 1 billion marks the first year, increasing annually to 2.5 billion marks. After 5 years, ultimately the plan was unworkable and replaced in 1929 by the Young Plan, which theoretically reduced total German debt to 112 billion gold marks, supposedly payable over a period of 59 years, to end in 1988. Once the National Socialist government consolidated power, the debt was repudiated and Germany made no further payments. After Germany's defeat in World War II, West Germany continued the payments and settled the principal amount. By 1980, by 2010, the German government paid the final reparations-related payments 92 years after the end of the war. So, they see the National Socialists canceled that debt. See, that's the good thing. They did a lot of good stuff. Okay, let's see. I mean, look, Henry Ford was told by Jewish people in his advisory committee and his entourage that the Jews were going to start World War I, and it wasn't going to end until they wanted it to end, right? And then Hitler says, this is not right. We're not going to pay this. Why should they pay it? They didn't start it. They didn't, And good for Hitler, you know what I mean? Okay, let's see. 181. To be sure, yet another important factor emerges in regard to England's attitude toward Germany. The decisive influence world Jewry also possesses in England. Okay, see, well, how come he didn't know, how come he should have known that was going to be an impossible impasse. You weren't dealing with the English, you were dealing with this world Jewry. To be sure, yet another important factor emerges in regard to England's attitude toward Germany. The decisive influence world Jewry also possesses in England. That's why when Hitler sent over Hess to go over there with peace treaty, they hid him away, and it was one of these where they wouldn't take peace for an answer. You should read some good Winston Churchill books by David Irving, for instance. Just as surely as Anglo-Saxonism itself can overcome its war psychosis vis-a-vis Germany, world Jewry just as surely will neglect nothing to keep the old enmities alive so as to prevent a pacification of Europe from materializing and thereby enable it to set its Bolshevik destructive tendencies into motion and the confusion of a general unrest. We could not discuss world policy without taking this most terrible power into account. Therefore, I will deal especially with this problem further in this book. So he's exactly right. The problem continues to this day. It's the New World Order, and they're up to the same no good. The whole, everything from, the LGBT thing, normalization of that, and the pop artists, the perverted pop artists, and all this stuff they're promoting. It's like Berlin in the 1930s, and I'm not the only one who sees it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. If today Germany seeks soil in East Europe, this is not the sign of an extravagant hunger for power, but only the consequence of her need for territory. So now this is where I really part companies with Hitler, because he was kind of an expansionist, but not to the degree that they say. He wasn't out to take over the world. He certainly had the right, I think, to take back the land in Poland. But he seemed to sort of have this kind of, open-ended Not that that's what he was doing in World War II. In World War II, he, as far as I can tell, that, of course, what I was taught in school was all, BS. Get the land back from Poland and defeat the the Bolsheviks and free Russia. Russia needed they needed to be liberated. He was going to do that. But instead, somebody provoked the rest of Europe to go after Hitler. And General Patton was right. We fought on the wrong side of that war. All right, let's see here. Okay, what am I up to? Okay. 186. Okay. On top of that, in proportion as France declines in her own people's power, the state proceeds to the opening up of her reservoir of black people. Thus, a danger of unimaginable proportion draws near for Europe. The idea of French Negroes who can contaminate white blood on the Rhine as the cultural guards against Germany is so monstrous that it would have been regarded as completely impossible only a few decades ago. Surely France itself would suffer the greatest harm through this blood pollution, but only if the other European nations remain conscious of the value of their white race. Viewed in purely military terms, France can very well supplement her European formations, and as the World War has shown, also commit them effectively. And by the way, Hitler didn't hate blacks. He just didn't like race mixing, and because there was black Nazis who fought with him, and you got to get Veronica Clark's book, Black Nazis, and she's got I think there's at least 2 of them anyway. Viewed in purely military terms, France can very well supplement her European formations. Finally, this completely non-French black army indeed vouchsafes a certain defense against communist demonstrations, since utter subordination in all situations will be easier to preserve in an army which is not all linked by blood to the French people. This development entails its greatest danger for Italy. First of all, if the Italian people want to shape its future according to its own interests, it will ultimately have black armies mobilized by France as its enemy. Thus, it cannot in the least lie in Italy's interest to be in a state of enmity with Germany, something which even in the best of cases cannot make a profitable contribution to the shaping of Italian life in the future. On the contrary, if any state can finally bury war and enmity, it is the state of Israel. Of Italy, in the state of Italy. Italy has no inherent interest in a further oppression of Germany if, for the future, both states want to attend to their most natural tasks. Bismarck has already perceived this fortunate circumstance more than once. Did he confirm the complete parallel between German and Italian interests? It was he who even pointed out that Italy of the future must seek her development on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, and it was he who further ascertained the harmony of Germany and Italian interests by stressing that only France could think of disturbing the shaping of Italian life, whereas Germany was bound to welcome it from her viewpoint. Okay, that's 186. Let's see here. Okay, 189. Indeed, the instinct of self-preservation of these people and parties, so often visible in truth by itself, speaks against any resurgence of the German nation, since the freedom struggle for German honor perforce would mobilize forces which must lead to the fall and destruction of the former defilers of German honor. There is no such thing as a struggle for freedom without a general national resurgence, but a resurgence of the national conscience and the national honor is unthinkable without first bringing those responsible for the previous degradation to justice. That makes sense. Okay, let's see. Since the year 1920, I have tried with all means and most persistently to accustom the National Socialist movement to the idea of an alliance among German, Italian, and England. This was very difficult, especially in the first years after the war, since the God punish England standpoint, first and foremost, still robbed our people of any capacity for clear and sober thinking in the sphere of foreign policy and continued to hold it prisoner. The situation of the young movement was in infinitely difficult, even vis-a-vis Italy, especially since an unprecedented reorganization of the Italian people set in under the leadership of the brilliant statesman Benito Mussolini, which drew the protest of all the states directed by Freemasonry. Wow, that's pretty that's pretty telling. Wow. Let me see here. For whereas up to the year 1922, the fabrication of official German opinion took altogether no notice of the suffering of those parts of our people severed from Germany through their crimes, and now suddenly began to honor the self-trial as their intention. Okay, so this is where he gets into the whole self-Tyrol Italian, thing that's he says that, that's not really what they should be focusing on. Okay. Okay, 192. Okay. We lost the war in consequence of a lack of national passion against our enemies. This is, World War I. The opinion in national circles was that we must replace this harmful deficiency and anchor this hatred against the former enemies in the peace. At the same time, it was noteworthy that from the start, this hatred was concentrated more against England and later Italy than against France. Against England because thanks to this soporific Bethmann-Hollowegen policy, nobody had believed in a war with England up to the last hour. Therefore, her entry into the war was viewed as an extraordinary, shameful crime against loyalty and faith. In the case of Italy, the hatred was even more understandable in view of the political thoughtlessness of our German people. They had been so imprisoned in the midst and fog of the Triple Alliance by official government circles that even Italy non-intervention for the benefit of Austria-Hungary and Germany was viewed as a breach of loyalty. And they saw boundless perfidy in the later joining up of the Italian people with our enemies. This accumulated hatred was discharged in typically bourgeois national fulmination and battle cry, God punish England. Since God is just as much on one side of the stronger and the more determined, as well as preferably on the side of those who are cleverer, he manifestly refused to inflict this punishment. Nevertheless, at least during the war, whipping up of our national passion by every means was not only allowed, but obviously called for. It was only a hindrance in that we were blinded by it to the real actualities, although the passion was never fanned too high among us. In politics, there is no standpoint of contrariness, and therefore, even during the war, it was wrong to draw no other consequences, especially from Italy's entry into the war coalition, except those of a flaming anger and indignation. For on the contrary, we should have had the duty then especially to keep on re-examining the possibilities of the situation in order to come to those decisions that might have warranted consideration for saving the threatened German nation. Okay. Okay, let's see. For with Italy's entry into the front of the Entente, an extraordinary aggravation of the war situation was unavoidable, not only in the consequence of the increase in terms of arms which the Entente acquired, but much more rather in consequence of the moral strengthening which necessarily lay in the emergence of such a power on the side of the world coalition being formed especially for France. In terms of the duty, the nation's political leaders at time perforce should have decided, cost what it may, to put an end to the 2- and 3-front war. Germany was not responsible for the further maintenance of the corrupt, slovenly Austrian state, nor did the German soldier fight for the family power policy of the hereditary House of Habsburg. This is best laid in the mind of our non-combatant hooray shouters, but not in that of those at the front shedding their blood. The sufferings and hardships of the German musketeers were already immeasurable in the year 1915. These sufferings could be demanded for the future and the preservation of German people, but not for the salvation of the Habsburg big power megalomania. It was a monstrous idea to let millions of German soldiers bleed in a hopeless war only so that a dynasty could preserve a state, the most private dynastic interest of which for centuries had been anti-German. This insanity will become completely understandable to us in its entirety only if we keep in view that the best German blood had to be shed so that in the most favorable case the Habsburgs might again have another chance to denationalize the German people in peacetime. It's kind of like the Americans going to war against Germany in World War II. Okay. Okay, page 197. In view of this compelling probability of a latter enmity of Italy with France already in the year 1920, this very state came under consideration primarily as a future ally for Germany. The probability increased to certainty when, with the victory of fascism, the weak Italian government, which ultimately was subject to international influence, was eliminated, and a regime took place which had nailed the exclusive representation of Italian interests as a slogan on its banners. It's kind of like Make America Great Again. Let's see, when is okay, 199. 3 to the end. At the same time, it is noteworthy that our national circles of bourgeois and patriotic origin never at all realized that the strongest proof of the fallacy of their attitude toward foreign policy lies in the concurrence of Marxism, Democrats, and centrists, above all, especially the concurrence of Jewry. But one must know our German bourgeois well in order immediately to know why this is so. They are all infinitely happy at least to have found an issue in which they presumed unity of the German people seems to be affected, no matter if this concurs a stupidity. Despite this, it is infinitely comforting for a courageous bourgeois and fatherland politician to be able to talk in tones of national struggle without receiving a punch on the jaw for it from the nearest communist. So that's great. This is just like Trump. He can say whatever he wants about the media, but you never hear him talk about the Council on Foreign Relations or the Federal Reserve. So he can make it look like, oh yeah, because if he starts to talk about the Council on Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve, he's going to get a punch in the face by the communists that run our country, the shadow government. They that are spared this only for the reason that their political conception is just as sterile in national terms as it is valuable in Jewish Marxist terms either does not occur to these people or it is concealed in the deepest recesses of their being. The extent which the corruption of lies and cowardice has assumed among us is something unheard of. Wow, it just sounds like exactly today they're cultivating a nation of cowards. They're afraid to talk about, say the truth. Okay, where in the year 1920 I undertook to orient this foreign policy position of the movement toward Italy, I at first ran into complete incomprehension on part of national circles as well as so-called fatherland circles. It was simply incomprehensible these people how, contrary to the general duty of continual protest, one could formulate a political idea which taken practically signified the intrinsic liquidation of one of the enemies of the World War. So he had the same, it's the same problem today. Like if I suggest to people, like, okay, I have friends who hate Trump, and after the election they were so upset. So I said, why don't you do what I'm doing? Why don't you guys secede and you can have liberal nation. You don't like Trump, just, oh, we can't do that. That would be what would you call it? Irreligious, an abomination, sacrilegious. That's it, sacrilegious. Okay, it would be sacrilegious. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see. Let's keep on going here. Okay. In general national circles found beyond comprehension that I did not want to place the main weight of national activity on protests which were trumpeted to the skies in front of Feldherren Hall in Munich, or somewhere else now against Paris and then against London or against Rome, but wanted to place it instead on a culmination first within Germany of those responsible for the collapse. Now, Trump did almost say something like this when he was like, okay, what's the worst enemy? I think he said they're the hardest people to deal with. Not the Russians, not the North Koreans, not the blah, 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 blah. It's the Americans, the USA, but he was only talking about the Democrat media complex. He really wasn't talking about the actual shadow government, unfortunately. A flaming protest demonstration against Paris also took place in Munich on the occasion of Paris Diktat, which, to be sure, must have caused M. Clemens and little worry, but it influenced me to elaborate with all vigor the National Socialist attitude in opposition to this protest mania. France had only done what every German could know and perforce should have known. If I were a Frenchman, I would have supported Clemenceau as a matter of course. To bark permanently at an overpowering adversary from a distance is as undignified as it is idiotic. On the contrary, the national opposition of the fatherland circles should have bared its teeth at those in Berlin who were responsible for and guilty of terrible catastrophe of our collapse. Right? So yeah, you go after the Marxist, the cultural Marxist. Not this, whatever, not the puppet show. You got to go after the actual people that running the puppeteers, To be sure, it was more comfortable to scream against Paris curses which could not be actualized in view of the factual conditions than to stand up against Berlin with deeds. This also applied especially to the representatives of the Bavarian government policy who, to be sure, sufficiently exhibit the nature of their brilliance by the facts of their success up to now, for the very men who continually asserted the desire to preserve Bavaria's sovereignty and who at the same time also had in view maintenance of the right to conduct foreign policy should primarily have been obliged to put forth a possible foreign policy of such sort that Bavaria thereby could of necessity have obtained leadership of the real national opposition in Germany conceived in its grand aspects. In the view of the complete inconsistency of the Reich policy of the deliberate intention to ignore all real avenues of success is precisely the Bavarian state that should have risen to the role of spokesman for a foreign policy which, according to human prediction, might one day have brought an end to Germany's dreadful isolation. Okay. All right. This situation changed almost in one stroke when Mussolini had begun the march on Rome, as if by magic word the running fire of poisoning and slander against Italy by the entire Jewish press began from this very hour. And only after the year 1922, the South-Tyrol question raised and made into a pivotal point of German-Italian relations, whether South-Tyrolians themselves wanted it so or not. It did not take long before even Marxists became the representatives of national opposition, and now one could experience the unique spectacle of Jews and Bolshevik Germany's social democrats and members of patriotic leagues, communist national bourgeoisie, arm in arm, spiritually marching across the Brenner in order to carry out reconquest of the territory in mighty battles, to be sure, without the shedding of blood. Now, this is exactly what's going on now. Exactly what's going on now with Hungary, and how the media and the certain people who own the media are trying to rile the American people up against Hungary because this guy is supposedly neo-Nazi. Just because the Hungarians are free from their influence, we're supposed to think that they're our enemies. Oh, well, we should do like Hungary. We should become free of their influence as well. Okay. All right, let's see here. A charm of a holy special character was further added to this bold national front by the fact that even those typically Bavarian representatives of Bavarian sovereign rights, whose spiritual forefathers over 100 years before had surrendered the good Adria's Hofer to the French and let him be shot, also vigorously interested themselves in the foreign freedom struggle for the country of Andreas Hofer. Okay, since the influence of the Jewish press gang and the national bourgeois and patriotic thunderheads who ran after them has really succeeding blown up South-Tyrol problem to the dimensions of a vital question of the German nation. Okay, so yeah, he actually, I mean, he's right on. He was right on. Now, no wonder, they never want, they don't want you to, how dare you, read anything Hitler wrote, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I mean, it's like you're not allowed to look at this stuff. It's going to expose us. All right, let's see here. All right. Okay. Thus, if someone would find a solution that is just in national sense, he must first of all completely exclude the concept of South Tyrol from general discussion, for one cannot war on the Italians on moral grounds because they have taken an area in which 200,000 Germans live next to 400,000 Italians. If we ourselves, conversely, want to win this territory again for Germany as a redress of this injustice, this is if we want to commit a still greater injustice than is the case with Italy. So basically what he's saying is, well, wait, there's only 200,000 Germans, there's 400,000 Italians. If we take that land, we're going to be worse than Italians. But the best thing there, right, would be to take the people back. Or I guess they could have split the land, in thirds, maybe. But at any rate, let's see here. 208, 204. We're up to 204, guys. 208. Okay, 208. Moving along. We're going to get there. At that time, however, you were still so cowardly that never once did you dare come to one of our meetings for fear of being grudged by your present foreign policy allies, the Marxist street tramps. Crudgeled. Is that the word, crudgeled? I guess. Yeah. I don't know, but I mean, you're getting beat up because the Marxists were always there to, it's like the Antifa. That's what the Antifa is today. It's like a whole rerun of what the Germans were going through in the 30s, the late 20s and 30s. We're rerunning it. Wow. Okay. Wow. So yeah, you should get this book and read it. Actually, right? 209. This should be in your history class. You go to school. If you go to school, it should be in your history. Okay. Let's see. 1, 2. Okay. I am of the conviction that one day I will not be lacking in the determination to bear the responsibility, even if necessary, of staking the blood of the German people, but I fight against even a single German being dragged off to a battlefield for fools or criminals to nourish their plans on his blood. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Why go to war for these trillionaire bankers, and after the war's done, you have less freedom than you had? You're only helping them consolidate power. Oh, man. How can people do that? I don't want to. The gentlemen of the Bavarian People's Party, the German nationalists, and even the Marxist defilers of our culture are concerned about German culture of South-Tyrol, but undisturbed, they let the culture of the homeland be insulted by the most wretched, bungling works and surrender the German stage to the race shame of a Johnny Splout-Off. Which, let me see, or Johnny Split-Off is a musical about a womanizing black jazz musician and a thief widely viewed Germany as promoting interracial mixing. It was banned during the National Socialist period and officially listed in the Entente Music, degenerate music display, which accompanied more famous degenerate art. So it's kind of like our, gangster rap of today. It's the gangster rap of today. I could see that labeling that degenerate. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Where are we on? 2M. Okay. Okay. And hypocritically, they lament the oppression of German culture, life, in South Tyrol, while they themselves most cruelly persecute those in the homeland who want to protect German culture from a deliberate, intentional destruction. Here, the Bavarian People's Party incites the state power against those who raise protests against the infamous defilement of our people's culture. What do these solicitous protectors of German culture in South Tyrol do in Germany itself for defense of German culture? They have let the theater sink to the level of a brothel, into sites of demonstrated race defilement, and destroyed all foundations of our folk life with movies holding honesty and morality up to ridicule. They connive at the cubist and Dadaistic infatuation of our plastic art. They themselves protect the fabrication of this base deception or madness. They let German literature sink into mud and filth and surrender the whole intellectual life of our people to international Jewry. The same thing is happening today. This is exactly unique. Talk about history repeats itself. Wow. I remember because I never had a television. When I grew up, we had a television in our house, and right up till about. So I guess I watched TV right up until about after the Brady Bunch. That was, I think, the last television I saw. And then when I moved out, I never got a TV. I never owned a television. I don't mean the last single television I ever saw, but I mean it was the last time, it was like a regular time killer. And so since I moved out, it hasn't been at all, But I've seen, from time to time, I've been exposed to secondhand television. And I saw this thing that I guess it was some show from the 90s, but I mean it sounded like it was something that would have been considered like pornographic in the 70s, and it was regular television, it was like that. All right. So anyway, okay. So so that's not the ragings of a madman. This is somebody who knows what the hell he's talking about. All right. And the same contemptible pack is so brazen-faced as to stand up for German culture in South Tyrol, whereas the only aim they have in mind naturally is to incite two cultured peoples against each other, so that in the end they can all more easily reduce them to the level of their own culture wretchedness. Wow, he's got this exactly right. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to stir up the Germans against the Italians based on this minor issue. It really shouldn't, like Hitler's saying, it's not really an issue. We don't need to be fighting the Italians for this. It's ridiculous. And, right, and the purpose is there's somebody stirring us up. It's just, I can't, really the best comparison is what's going on now with them trying to stir us up against Hungary. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, 227. 3 and footnote. Okay. So we really get towards the end, guys. 227. It's about 240-page book, so 227. Okay. Okay, this is interesting. Okay. South Tyrol was lost and betrayed by the shameless acts of the men and parties who, after the collapse, defiled Germans' honor, destroyed the esteem of our people before the world, and only thereby encouraged our adversaries to the enormity of their demands. It was further lost by the contemptible cowardice of the National Bourgeoisie Party and patriotic leagues who dishonorably capitulated everywhere before the terror of the baseness and villainy. Okay. The betrayal of German army by Marxists on the home front, November 1918. Hitler is referring to an article by William Flynn, originally published in the American Liberty magazine, titled Tapped Wires. Flynn was head of the U.S. Secret Service. Flynn's article is translated in German and published in the Münchener Neuesten Nachrichten. The German translation, titled How America Entered the War, quoted from Liberty article, which revealed that Woodrow Wilson ordered the tapping of the telephone communications of the German embassy in Washington as early as 1915, and used the information to prepare his confidant, Bernard, instructions to begin the gradual mobilization of industry for war, even though Germany was still at peace with America. In addition, the article also revealed how Wilson deliberately sabotaged a bill before the U.S. Congress which would have warned Americans not to use armed commercial vessels at sea. President Wilson most bitterly fought against the proposal. He needed the loss of American lives in order to incite feelings against Germany. The article said in Hitler's original manuscript, a space was left for the article, although it was not inserted. The full article text is contained in the appendix. Wow. So there you go. There's our there's our president, who's was totally owned by a shadow government. Okay, let's see here. 227, 228. Okay, and okay, let's see. This is what the Münchener Neuesten Nachrichten writes now. The man thus characterized, however, was a typical representative of German foreign policy before the war, just as he is also typical representative of the German foreign policy of the Republic. This fellow, who would have been sentenced to hanging by a political tribunal in any other state, is the German representative of the League of Nations in Geneva. These men bear the guilt and responsibility for Germany's collapse, and therefore also the loss of the South Tyrol, and with them the guilt falls on all parties of men who either caused such conditions or covered them up, or also tactically countenanced them, or did not fight against them in the sharpest manner. The men, however, who today brazenly try to deceive public opinion anew would like to aver that others are guilty of the loss of South Tyrol must first give a detailed accounting of what they have done for its preservation. As for my person, at any rate, I can proudly declare that since the time that I became a man, I have always been for the strengthening of my people. And when the war came, I fought on the German front in the West for 4.5 years, and since its end I have been fighting against corrupt creatures whom Germany can thank for this disaster. Since that time I have entered into no compromise with the betrayers of German fatherland, either in domestic or foreign policy matters, but immovably proclaim their destruction one day as the aim of my life's work and the mission of National Socialist movement. I can all the more calmly endure the yelping of the cowardly bourgeois curs as well as that of patriotic leaguers, as I know the average poltroon of these creatures, for me, unspeakably contemptible all too well. That they also know me is the reason for their hue and cry. So See, he did not get along with the normies of his time because they were fooled by some, satanic synagogue of Satan. Okay. All right, let's see here. Moving on now. 231:7. I think we read that whole thing now. 230. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. 231:7. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. General European democracy will either be replaced by a system of Jewish Marxist Bolshevism, to which all states will succumb one after the other, or by a system of free and unlinked national states who, in the free play of forces, will set their stamp on Europe in accordance with the number and importance of their specific folkdom. I should put that on the side of my truck. That's a great that's a great little statement there. Wow. Okay, and that's actually what happened. You think about it. That's exactly the United Nations. It's exactly the United Nations is what he's talking about. It's so evil. Okay. Also not good for fascism to exist isolated in Europe as an idea. Either the world of ideas from which it stems is generalized, or Italy will one day again succumb to the general ideas of another Europe. It's interesting because I watched that movie. That's right. That's what I could talk about that movie. Let me see if I have it here. Let's see here. Let's see. I don't know where I put it. Okay. Well, I can't find it right now, but I had Oswald Mosley. I watched the movie about Oswald Mosley. I'll talk about that next. Let me just finish this because he was a British, like a British National Socialist, fascist type of guy. Okay, we're almost finished this, guys. We're page 232. Okay. If Germany will succeed in taking part in a new state coalition in Europe, which either must lead to a shift of emphasis in the League of Nations itself or allow decisive power factors altogether outside the League of Nations to develop, then the first domestic political prerequisite for a latter active foreign policy would be realizable. The lack of weapons imposed on us by the Versailles Treaty and thus our real lack of defensive ability could come to an end, albeit slowly. This is possible only if the coalition of victors itself quarrels over this question, but never, however, in alliance with Russia, let alone in a union with other so-called oppressed nations against the front of a coalition of the former victor states that encircle us. Then, in the far future, it may be possible to think of a new association of nations consisting of individual states with a high national value, which could then stand up to the threatening overwhelming of the world by American Union. For it seems to me that the existence of English world rule inflicts fewer hardships on present-day nations than the emergence of American world rule. Wow. Wow. That's he was right. That's exactly what's happening now. Wow, because there was free sovereign nations. When England was pretty much the world power. Now that America's taken over, the end of free sovereign nations is at hand, and that's what the purpose of the American military is to end sovereign nations. That's why I care less. I don't want to hear Trump spouting on about giving money to the military. We don't need a military. All right, let's see here. All it's used for is to destroy national sovereignty of other nations. That's to build a new world order. We could live without it. It's it's all BS. Okay. If you have to, you have. If there's you're actually being attacked, you should. You could put together anything we needed to at this point. we have all the power. It's just like this business of Israel. Israel doesn't need America to defend Israel. They could wipe out all their enemies. They got enough military power to wipe out all their enemies. They don't need us. They're just using us to help them build the New World Order. So that's what we're being. That's all we are. America is the United States is the original New World Order nation. If you don't believe me, look on your dollar bill. All right, let's see here. I'm up to page 234. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, in many many nations, the shift of world was brought by influence in which no way sprang from real domestic interest. These nations, or even which could also be to their benefit. Monstrous war propaganda. Monstrous war propaganda began to befog public opinion of these peoples and stir it into enthusiasm for a war which for these very peoples in part could not bring any gain at all, and indeed sometimes ran downright counter to the real interests. That's exactly exactly right. No wonder they don't want, no wonder they want you to think that Hitler was so evil. That's why, you're supposed to be so afraid of Hitler. Oh my gosh, he's so scary. He's Now you read what he says, and makes perfect sense, and it's exactly what's going on in the world today. And we fought on the wrong side, and we should have been fighting with Hitler against the Russians. Let's see here. Okay. International Jewry was the power which instigated this enormous propaganda. For as senseless as the participation in the war by many of these nations may have been, seen from the viewpoint of their own interest, it was just as meaningful and logically correct seen from the viewpoint and the interest of world Jewry. Boy, no wonder they don't want you to. No wonder they don't want you to read any of his stuff. Wow. Oh my gosh. It is not my task here to enter into a discussion of the Jewish question as such. This cannot take place in the framework of a necessarily brief and compressed presentation. The following is said here only in the interest of a better understanding. Jewry is a people with a racial core that is not wholly unitary. Nevertheless, as a people, it has special intrinsic characteristics which separate it from all other peoples living on the globe. Jewry is not a religious community, but the religious bond between Jews. Rather, it is, in reality, the momentary governmental system of the Jewish people. The Jews has never had a territorially bounded state of its own in the manner of Aryan states. Nevertheless, his religious community is a real state since it guarantees the preservation, the increase, and the future of the Jewish people. But this is solely the task of the state, that the Jewish state is subject to no territorial limitation, as is the case with the Aryan states, is connected with the character of the Jewish people, which is lacking in the productive forces for the construction and preservation of its own territorial state. Just as every people has a basic tendency of all its earthly actions possess a mania for self-preservation as its driving force. Likewise, it is exactly so with Jewry too. Only here, in accord with their basically different dispositions, the struggle for existence of Aryan people and Jewry is also different in its forms. The foundation of the Aryan struggle for life is the soil, which he cultivates and which provides the general basis for an economy satisfying primarily its own needs within its own orbit, through the productive forces of its own people. Because of a lack of productive capacities of its own, the Jewish people cannot carry out the construction of a state viewed in a territorial sense, but as a support of its own existence, it needs the work and creative activities of other nations. Thus, the existence of the Jew himself becomes a parasitical one within the lives of other peoples. Hence, the ultimate goal of the Jewish struggle for existence is the enslavement of productivity of active peoples. In order to achieve this goal, which in reality has represented Jewry's struggle for existence at all times, the Jew makes use of all weapons that are in keeping with the whole complex of his character. Therefore, in domestic policies within the individual nations, he fights first for equal rights and later for super rights. The characteristics of cunning, intelligence, astuteness, connivery, dissimulation, etc., rooted in the character of his folkdom, serve him as weapons there too. They are as such stratagems in his war of survival as those of other peoples in combat. In the foreign policy, he tries to bring nations into a state of unrest, to divert them from their true interest and to plunge them into reciprocal wars, and in this very way gradually rise to mastery over them with the help of the power of money and propaganda. His ultimate goal is the denationalization, the promiscuous bastardization of other peoples, the lowering of the racial level of the highest peoples, as well as the domination of this racial mismatch through the extirpation of the folkish intelligentsia and its replacement by the members of his own people. The end of the Jewish world struggle, therefore, will always be a bloody Bolshevization. In truth, this means the destruction of all the intellectual upper classes linked to their peoples so that he can rise to become the master of a mankind become leaderless. Just like that guy I was telling you about, there's this Duvid on YouTube. He's once, this is what he wants, but he won't come out and say it. Stupidity, cowardice, and baseness, therefore, plays into his hands. The bastards, he secures for himself the first openings for the penetration of an alien nation. Hence, the result of Jewish domination is always the ruin of all culture and finally the madness of the Jew himself, for he is as parasitic of nations, and his victory signifies his own end as much as the death of his victim. With the collapse of the ancient world, the Jews encountered young, in part still completely unspoiled peoples, sure in racial instinct, who protected themselves against infiltration. He was a foreigner, and all his lies and dissimulation helped him little for nearly 1,500 years. It was the feudal domination and the government of the princes which first created a general situation which allowed him to attach himself to the struggle of an oppressed social class, indeed to make this struggle his own in a short time. He received civil equality with the French Revolution. With that, the bridge was constructed over which he could stride to the conquest of political power within nations. The 19th century gave him a dominating position within an economy of nations through the building up of loan capital based on ideas regarding interest. Finally, through the subterfuge of stock holdings, he placed himself in possession of a great part of the production sites, and with the help of a stock exchange, he gradually became not only the ruler of public economic life, but ultimately also of political life. He supported this rule by means of the intellectual contamination of nations with the help of Freemasonry, as well as by the work of the press become dependent upon him. He found the potential strength for the destruction of the bourgeois intellectual regime in the newly rising fourth estate of the handcraftsmen, just as once before the bourgeoisie had been the means for the demolition of feudal domination. At the same time, bourgeois stupidity and dishonest lack of principle, avarice, and cowardice worked into his hands. He formed the vocational estate of the handcraftsmen into a special class which he now allowed to take up the struggle against the national intelligentsia. Marxism became the spiritual father of the Bolshevik Revolution. It is the weapon of terror which the Jew now applies ruthlessly and brutally. The economic conquest of Europe by Jews was... let me see, am I still recording? Yeah, okay. The economic conquest of Europe by Jews was pretty much completed around the turn of the century, and now he began to safeguard it politically. That means the first attempts to extirpate the national intelligentsia were undertaken in the form of revolutions. He utilized the tensions between European nations, which are in great part to be ascribed to their general need for territory with the consequences which arise therefrom for his own advantage by systematically inciting them to world war. The aim was the destruction of inherently anti-Semitic Russia, as well as the destruction of the German Reich, which in the administration army still offers resistance to the Jew. The further aim is the overthrow of those dynasties which had not yet been made subject to a democracy dependent upon and led by Jews. The Jewish war aim has, at least in part, become completely achieved. Tsarism, Kaiserism in Germany were eliminated. With the help of Bolshevik revolution, the Russian upper classes and also the Russian national intelligentsia were murdered and completely extirpated amid inhuman agonies and atrocities. For the Russian people, the total number of victims of this Jewish struggle for hegemony in Russia amounted to 28 to 30 million people, and number of dead. This is 15 times more than the World War cost Germany. After the successful revolution, he completely tore down the bonds of order, of morality, of custom, etc., abolished marriage as a lofty institution, and instead proclaimed a general copulation with the aim of breeding a general inferior human mismatch by way of chaotic bastardization, which by itself would be incapable of leadership and which ultimately would no longer be able to do without the Jews as its own intellectual element. The future will show to what extent this has succeeded and to what extent now forces of the natural reaction can still bring about a change of this most terrible crime of all times against mankind. This is correct. This is one of the most terrible crimes against mankind. He's correct about this. At the moment, he exerts himself to lead the remaining states toward the shamed condition. Thereby he is supported and covered in his strivings and actions by the bourgeois national parties of the so-called National Fatherland Leagues, whereas Marxism, democracy, and so-called Christian center emerge as aggressive shock troops. The bitterest struggle for the victory of Jewry at the present time is being waged in Germany. Here it is the National Socialist movement which alone has taken upon itself the struggle against this execrable crime against mankind. In all European states at the moment, a struggle in part quiet and violent, albeit often under wraps, is being waged for political power. Outside Russia, the struggle has first been decided in France. There, the Jew, favored by a number of circumstances, entered into a community of interest with French national chauvinism. Since then, Jewish stock exchange and French bayonets have been allies. The struggle is undecided in England. There, the Jewish invasion still meets with an old British tradition. The instincts of Anglo-Saxonism are still so sharp and alive that one cannot speak of a complete victory of Jewry, but rather, in part, the latter is still forced to adjust its interests to those of the English. Well, I don't think he was right about that. I think they already owned the government, but not the people. Okay. If the Jew were to triumph in England, English interests would recede into the background, just as in Germany today. German interests no longer are decisive, but rather Jewish interests. On the other hand, if Britain triumphs, then a shift of English attitude vis-a-vis Germany can still take place. The struggle of Jewry for the hegemony is also decided in Italy. With the victory of fascism in Italy, the Italian people has triumphed. Even if the Jew is compelled to try to adjust himself to fascism in Italy today, his attitude towards fascism outside Italy nevertheless reveals his inner view of it. Only her own national interest is decisive and determining for Italy's fate since the memorable day when the fascist legions marched on Rome. For this reason also, no state is better suited than Italy for an ally for Germany. It is a consonant only with the bottomless stupidity and dissembling baseness of our so-called volkish representatives that they reject the only state that today is ruled along national lines, and as authentic German folkish element, they prefer to enter a world coalition with the Jews. It is fortunate that the time of these fools is played out in Germany. Thus, Germany folkish concept is released from the embrace of these creatures. As petty as they are pitiful, it will infinitely gain thereby. Okay. And then, then here's the excerpt. It's How America Entered the War. Okay, well, it's pretty interesting to see that, by then the American government was already in the hands of the Marxist. So I saw this movie, Oswald Mosley. Okay, but the thing is, they, as usual, they didn't do it any justice. They made it seem like he was a megalomaniac, and he just his reason for opposing Jews was just to placate these racists, and that was it, and it didn't really get into much of. It was more like a soap opera. It was more like something you'd see, like BBC soap opera or something. But there's this guy on YouTube. That's where I found out. But there's a Apotheosis of Evil mini documentary. It's not a mini documentary. I should say the other way. It's a maxi documentary. I think it's 5 hours. He's got some really good. I wrote down some of these guys' names. He's got some really good references of people British guys who were, on the side of the Nazis because they knew what the deal was. They knew that they'd rather end up with still have an intact nation. They weren't anxious to see, the world turn away from nationalism. And they wanted to, it's funny. There's a statement in the United Nations about, one of their objectives is to make sure that people have the right to self-determination. The United Nations. These guys, these are British guys that wanted self-determination. But there was one guy, another guy, a radio announcer. They call him Lord Haw Haw, as a derisive, but I forget what his name is, but there was a couple other ones. I lost the piece of paper. Anyways, you got to watch the I think it's the last episode on that Apotheosis of Evil, where he goes into these British guys who knew what the deal was, and then there was also an American guy in the 50s. There was a National Socialist Party, and the media was questioning him, and he was saying that Hitler was one of the most maligned people in history since Jesus, and which is true. I think that, in that last passage I read there, that. I don't agree with him that the Jews are incapable of running a nation. I think they're doing an excellent job in Israel. The problem is that there's a lot of people out there that want to destroy the rest of the world in the process. I mean, I have no problem with a strong Israel. I have a problem, though, with people that are trying to destroy everybody else and prevent them from having strong nations. I have a real problem with that. I think that God has a problem with that too. I mean, that's why He destroyed the Tower of Babel. That was God. Remember the guy? God started this business of nationalities, and it was it's the way humans are created. The things are going to be best when they're able to develop in that way. It's just like, I always ask these people to think that, you're obligated to let anybody into your country, that kind of thing. I ask them if they lock their doors at night, and if they do lock their doors at night, it's because they hate their neighbors. Is that why they like? You know what I mean? See, so. But I really think that my thing is we have to rewrite. It's time to go back to the drawing board and start a new thing. And my idea is this. Here's my idea. And if I don't do this, maybe somebody who's got millions of dollars can pull this off. But and it might not even cost that much. If somebody knows, if you got some computer geek that knows how to do really good websites. The idea is this: you have a website that anybody can come and participate, and what they're doing is they're signing up. The way the website's set up it'll be set up so that you have this menu of options of values, government, religion, the kind of things, laws that you like, financial systems and so forth and everything. And you just fill it out. It's like one of these personality identifiers or whatever you want to call it, where you fill out, do you like this? Do you like that? Do you like this? Do you like that kind of thing? And what happens is you start to accumulate this information that says, okay, here's the people that want this. There's a lot of them that live here, and there's a lot of them that live there. And the people that want this, there's a lot of them that live here, and there's a lot of them that live there. And that's how you split things up. And you let them have their own monetary systems, their own freedom, their own sovereignty. Just like the United Nations says, let them, determine their own destiny, That's what needs to be done. That's what I would like to do, if I win the lottery. I got a couple tickets here. Maybe one of them's a winner. And then I'd set that website up, and it would be sort of the way forward. The way forward is these separation, love and division thing. Now, realistically, is it too late? Is there here's one of the problems with the way the world works. Is you got 90% of the people are followers, and there's 5% of the people on one end that are leaders. And what I mean by leaders, I mean just people that are able to think for themselves. And on the other end, you got another 5%. There are people. The difference is the 5% on the top are the ones with, the trillionaires and the billionaires and so forth. And then there's another 5% down the bottom, like myself, who, think for myself in it. I don't follow the crowd, but I don't have any resources or any power or anything. I just got a shadow banned YouTube channel, and and that's it. And so, and then the rest of the 90% of people are just going to follow whoever's pulling hardest. And it's sad because I think that's when Jesus said at one point that there are many that are on the path to destruction, and there's few that are going to find the path to salvation. And then there's the other passage about people who, we did this in your name, we did that, we did all this stuff, and he's like, depart from me, I never knew you. I kind of get the feeling that that's what he's doing there is he's saying, you were associating with my name just because it was the popular thing to do in your context. You weren't really with me. You were just, with the population, sort of. And that's the problem. What's the value? Why, what value is there having that 90% follow your pull if they're not, if they're only doing it because of that, because they're being pulled? There's not a value in that. See, there's not. That's why the kingdom of God is concentrated on quality, not quantity. that's, and I think that's also why, maybe this is the way it's going to play out. Is it going to, the people with the more power are able to pull that 90% with them into this new world order and so forth. Now, what would change that would be, for instance, if the fact that it was Jewish, Israeli, and American Jews that did 9/11, that becomes common knowledge. That could pull the 90% in the other direction. If it becomes common knowledge that who started World War I, who started World War II, and so forth, and who are these people that are influencing nations to murder hundreds of thousands of people? Who's doing this? That's why. That's why that article I read earlier in that paper with the woman that, this Jewish woman that lost her son in World Trade Center doesn't want you to point fingers. She doesn't want to know who did it. She doesn't want, because, that's, that's somebody who loves lies, People who love lies cannot enter the kingdom of God. And so, if the truth prevails, then the tide will turn. Now, what's going to happen? And this is where I often differ from Red Ice. Is that I think what will happen in the long run is that what I'm saying, that people will catch on. That they're going to catch on and say, "Hey, wait a minute, you mean, my grandfather fought in World War II and died because, he's empowering and enriching these guys. It had nothing to do with it for saving the world, there's nothing to do with the saving the world and the freedom and all this the crap that they. When people realize that, they're going to be right. The right thing to do is to get rid of that evil influence, and send them back to Israel, if that's, the correct destination. And you stop there, But I think what's going to happen is I think that people are going to go too far. I mean, this is sort of according to the scripture. I think I end every one of my videos with this prophetic passage that, according to the scriptures, the people are going to go too far, and they're actually going to try to destroy Israel, and somehow that's going to be a catalyst to. It's going to be a catalyst to, cause the Jewish leadership to recognize Jesus as Messiah. Now, how that's going to work? See, prophetically, the Jewish leaders back in the days of Jesus, it was the leaders that rejected Jesus. And it was the leaders that tried to persuade people from not following him. It was the Jewish leadership. See, the nation, a lot of the common people, Jewish people, believed in Jesus, and so what's going to have to happen, prophetically, is there's going to come a day when the leadership of Israel recognizes Jesus as the Messiah. And this, having the entire world come up against Israel like that, could be the catalyst, to cause something like that to happen. Somehow that's going to happen. Well, there's the other thing, there's the other thing that, why, because people, one of the arguments amongst Christians, Christian Zionists and Christian anti-Zionists, whatever it is, why would God bring them back into the land? They're totally pagan and disobedient, atheist, and run the pornography industry and so forth. But that's not why they get in the first place. And the thing is, there might be, see, my theory is there might be 10% of them. There's a lot of Jews that believe in Jesus. And if there's 10% of them, that might be the, it might be the quota to get them back in the land. And then, this other thing, if they, if they turn to Jesus at the end, then that's when Jesus comes back and he defends them, and then Jesus does. Jesus sort of, finishes this job that Hitler started, and seeing to it that the nations are unharassed, and that's what's going. That's how I interpret the scriptures at this point. That's what I see happening. All right, so let me see. One other movie I wanted to talk about. So I saw this thing, Blast from the Past, because I heard him talking about it on Red Ice, I guess, so by this movie, and it was okay. I mean, it was basically, it's about this couple, young married couple in the 1960s who thinks there's a nuclear attack, and they go into the fallout shelter and come back up again. They have a kid in the process, and I think he's like 35 when they come back up again in the 90s in the culture shock. And the way the movie was presented, though, I felt like I was still left in the Matrix. By the time the time was over, I felt like I was still in the Matrix, in the sense that they acknowledged, for instance, that what good manners of the people back in the 60s, is a plus, but they didn't really, I sort of, but I felt like that they also, it was also presented in such a way that, aren't you glad that we've made progress since then in terms of, I don't know, society? I don't know how that's progress, though. See, it's kind of confusing, because it didn't really seem like, I mean, it's one of those, it's one of those movies that is, the ultimate idea is, though, you can't go back, kind of thing. And I don't know where that's coming from. What do you mean? Well, you can't go? Of course you can. You can do whatever you want. If you were free. The thing is, there's somebody else controlling. The culture's not controlled from the grassroots. Culture's controlled from the top down. There's cultural control systems, and cultural controllers. They decide, okay, like that 90s, I think it was a 90s Brady Bunch movie, where the Brady Bunch comes back. They're still around in the 90s, and the culture clash there. Who says it's progress? Why is that considered progress? The more immoral and decadent is considered progress. Who's doing this? Who's in charge of that? And that's why I say we're right back to where Adolf Hitler found himself. And so, what's his name? Trump is not. He's not. Let's suppose that he's sincere, and he knows that he's being controlled, and he's going to do as much as he can without ended up like John F. Kennedy. I don't. I kind of don't think that's what's happening. I think that if he maybe he knows he's controlled, and he doesn't care. I mean, he sees it as, like he's on the winning side, and he's, because you really need somebody. See, it's a shame, when John F. Kennedy made that speech about secret societies and blah, 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 and you know what? it was falling on deaf ears. People didn't know how to interpret that. They didn't know what the hell he was doing. You know what I mean? And that's why they were able to just kill him and say some crazy guy did it, you know. And people just sucked it up and believed it, you know. So you have to, you know, somebody like Trump, if he was actually going to try to save us from the cultural Marxists, he couldn't. He would have to. The only way he could do that, really, from his point of view, is with a military coup. He would have to surround himself by people that were willing to pull off some kind of military coup. That's the only way you got to do it. And look, this is like, 9/11 happens. They put Michael Chertoff in charge of, and that kind of thing. You got to read Christopher Boland's book. It just shows you how they got the fox guarding the hen house. That they put Michael Chertoff in charge of. You helped, cover this up, and we're gonna put you in charge. So, if you see something, say something. You call up, and he answers the phone. Oh, wow, it's like, So you call up the guy that did it. One of the guys that helped pull it off is going to answer the phone. Say, yeah, what do you got? Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Like that one guy. Remember this guy that was on InfoWars. I forgot his name. He was a lawyer. He was getting on the airplane. He saw the FBI guy trying to get the underwear bomber on because the people that work for the airlines were like, what's going on here? We can't, we don't do this. It's out of protocol. We don't let somebody on who's done passport and everything. And the guys, with the FBI and everything gets them on because they needed this underwear bombing thing because they wanted to sell, somebody in that chain of crooks who, needed to sell those X-ray machines, that's just icing on the cake. It's not like that's the only reason they're doing these things, but they're going to profit from it, coming and going. It's like the opioid crazy thing. The military-industrial complex goes and gets the poppies and the opium, and then they after the victims, the drug addicts, and then the government uses taxpayers' money to have these recovery places and all this overdose prevention stuff like this. So they're they're profiting from both ends of it. And not only that, but they like to have an opioid crisis. There was one of the Red Ice. They had a little clip of a guy, a Jewish guy, saying, we're not really afraid of a revolution because we got everybody drugged up on opioids, So, this is this is how they do things. This is how the world works, And I'm just talking about it. I'm just talking. I'm just talking. I'm not planning on actually doing anything like physically about it. It has to become, because I believe that, you got to win the rhetorical war if you're going to, and then you don't need to. If you win the rhetorical war, you don't need to actually conduct a physical war. And that's the way, that's how I'm approaching this, and that's really, as far as I'm concerned, the only way to approach it. If you can't win that rhetorical war, then you lost. You got to take no for an answer. That's sort of the, that's the way of, Jesus. That's his, like he said, to Pilate. Well, you wouldn't have power over me if it wasn't given to you from above, kind of thing. So if it can't be accomplished through argumentation, and apologetics and rhetoric and so forth, then it's not, it's not what's going to happen. It's not. It's the thing. It's not the thing that's going to happen. It's got to be one that way for. I mean, because who cares? Why? See, that's the thing. It goes back to what I said before. Who cares if you got this 90% of the people on your side? If they're only there because they're being forced. That's not. That's like I mean, this is one of the problems with Islam. Forced conversions. What kind of conversion is that? But that's not somebody's number. It's not a conversion. You're not converted. You're not. Whatever. All right. So, anyways, that was good. I had a lot of this stuff that was building up on my desk, and I had to clear my desk. And I had some books I wanted to share with you. And next time I get a big backlog of material to share, I will do so. And I have to have time too. So thanks for watching. Subscribe if you can. I don't know if you're able to subscribe. I mean, I don't know what's the deal here. Who actually gets to see my videos? If it's weird. But I think I had one new subscriber in 2 years. So that's why I say I'm the most shadow banned channel on YouTube. And so I was planning eventually going to some other, one of those other platforms, but I don't really, the first thing was that BitChute, but you got to have some crazy reference number, something you get from somebody. I don't know. It just seems like it's too much. But I got to find one and spend some time there and start putting up some material. And, if YouTube's going to, prevent people from seeing my video, why I got to go somewhere else, right? And I do spend an awful lot of time, like, I don't usually watch Red Ice on YouTube. I usually watch it on the website. And, YouTube is just really going to become, a matrix thing. It'll be good for some entertainment purposes, and, but that's about it. You're not going to get anything really. Because, I mean, one of the things about YouTube that was, interesting is the fact that you could get alternative views. If you're not going to be able to get alternative views, it's really, you only use it for entertainment. Watch music videos or something like that. So, okay. Take care.